Police lines in riot gear threw mortar and bricks and other objects, including bins set on fire, towards police officers. One derelict property on this road has been set on fire and gutted by flames. There's also a burned out car in the road. We're hearing this morning that 12 police officers have been injured and there have been 16 arrests after last night's disorder.
Well, earlier today, Northern Ireland Secretary Hilary Benn joined us on the programme, and he said that there was less disorder than the night before, but still condemned what he called racist thuggery.
The disorder we saw last night was at a lower level than the appalling violence and scenes we witnessed on Tuesday night. And I pay tribute to the courage of the PSNI, the emergency services, fire and ambulance, because they go towards the danger in order to protect people. And I also want to thank the many good people in Northern Ireland who've provided safety, shelter and support to people who've been affected by this, including those who have been intimidated by thugs out of their homes.
Nearly 3,000 patients a day were treated in hospital corridors or makeshift spaces in England last month alone, according to figures published today for the first time. That data reveals the scale of so-called corridor care, where patients are treated in unsuitable areas rather than in a bed or on a ward. That can include converted offices, chairs in hallways or other temporary treatment spaces. Ministers have described the practice as unsafe and unacceptable. The NHS says publishing the figures will help trusts to tackle the issue. In other news, Britain's biggest police force is pushing the Home Secretary to force phone companies to make stolen devices harder to reuse. The Met Commissioner says stolen phones should become unusable bricks, so they're no longer valuable to criminals. The force has started sharing data with Apple to track whether stolen handsets are reconnected to networks after being taken. Sir Mark Rowley says that phone thefts and robberies have fallen in recent years, but handsets remain a major driver of street crime.
This business model that these criminals are running depends on the fact that your stolen phone, even though it's locked, can be reactivated because of the security flaws within it. We've been putting pressure on the tech companies. Really pleased Apple have made some progress on their technology, which looks like it's having an effect on their phones.
And the US and Iran have launched fresh strikes across the Middle East for a second day, raising fears that a fragile ceasefire is starting to break down. Washington says it hit military, surveillance and radar sites in southern Iran after Donald Trump had warned Tehran it had taken too long to agree to a peace deal. Iran then fired back on American bases in Bahrain and Kuwait for a second day in a row, and also claimed to have targeted a US command centre in Jordan. Those are the latest headlines. This lunchtime, I'll be back with you at 1 o'clock.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 9 minutes past midday.
It is. We've got some breaking news to bring you to begin. The Pakistani asylum seeker Sheraz Malik has been sentenced to 10 years in jail with 4 years on extended licence for the rape of an 18-year-old.
But we'll pause that because we'll take you live to Belfast now, where a press conference is taking place.
Firstly, I want to strongly condemn the second night of disorder seen in some areas across Northern Ireland. This violent behaviour by a thuggish minority will not be tolerated. Last night we saw significant disorder in Newtonabbey and Portadown. We, the police, used water cannon and fired 20 AEP to quell that disorder. We arrested 16 people, 2 have already been charged. 12 officers were injured, some by petrol bombs, following that significant rioting. I am hugely grateful to the efforts of my officers for their incredible resilience and bravery in the face of that disorder. It was clear from the outset that those who attended were not intent on peaceful protest, rather they were intent on violence. Today we have launched Up Exposure. You'll see behind me the first 2 images of men we wish to speak to in relation to the disorder. There'll be further images released as our detectives work tirelessly to identify those responsible and bring them to justice. My message, my clear message to those who have taken part in violence or are thinking of taking to our streets: the stakes for you are high. We'll bring you to justice, and I know the judiciary in Northern Ireland stands ready to give long sentences to those bringing disorder to our streets. Our communities in Northern Ireland deserve to get back to normal. Yesterday, businesses shut their doors, trains were not running, and we saw schools close early due to fear. That is the impact these thugs are having. We, the PSNI, stand together with our communities. Together, we are all stronger than them. I know that the public look to us to feel safe, and that is a duty that weighs heavily on every police officer here in Northern Ireland. Tonight, we'll be back on the ground in significant numbers. Our numbers bolstered by our colleagues from Great Britain who are joining us on mutual aid. We'll see officers deployed all across Northern Ireland to protect our communities and to prevent disorder. Let me be clear, there can be peaceful protest. It is part of a democratic society. What we saw bears no resemblance to that. We should all listen to the words of the Ogilvy family, who issued an incredibly powerful statement calling for calm. They could not be more clear that violence is not in Stephen's name. I want to turn next to the disgraceful threats and intimidation directed to our nurses, doctors, carers and healthcare staff. Men and women who work every day to save lives and care for our sick relatives. They're the backbone of our public service. They're caring for our families, our friends and our loved ones. We're here to support them in the same way they support us. Tonight we'll be increasing our patrols of key areas. I've been talking to colleagues within health trusts and others to hear their concerns about their staff welfare. Today I'm meeting with Unison to hear their particular concerns and to offer our support. I'm also going to be meeting with members of the business community and minority communities to help reassure and get life back to normal here in Northern Ireland. The streets of Northern Ireland need to return to calm and order. Our children need to feel safe returning to their schools. Businesses need to feel they can open their doors. Everyone with influence needs to do all in their power to get the thugs off our streets. And I want to reassure you that the PSNI is there for all of our communities. The Chief Constable and I are very clear that we will be robust in bringing order to our streets. We will do our part to bring order. Happy to take any questions.
BBC. Thank you, Catherine Morrison from BBC and I. Who is behind this violence? What is your assessment of the level of involvement of loyalist paramilitaries? And can I ask you to comment on Sir Mark Rowley's claims that it was actors overseas agitating this trouble?
At this stage, we've no evidence to say that the violence is by loyalist paramilitaries, but I want to be clear, if we find that to be the case, we will not be shy in calling that out. What we have seen is significant coordination from online social media activity, some from people within Northern Ireland and some from outside of Northern Ireland, outside the island of Ireland, generating that activity. That momentum, that drive, that toxicity is what's bringing people out onto the streets. It needs to stop.
Can I ask what the PSNI can do about that?
Yes, we have a really important role in trying to see what people are putting online, particularly the toxic, poisonous, vile, criminal messages that we see, and we're actively taking action against those who put that on there. I want to appeal directly to the big social media companies. If you're hosting material content on your sites that is encouraging disorder, that needs to stop. We in the police, in government, and those people in those big companies need to do something about it. It's not helpful. We need to get life back to normal. They have a part to play in doing that.
Can I just clarify, have there been any arrests over social media material yet, or is it investigation?
At this stage, we've no arrest for social media content. That's part of our ongoing work.
Devon Way from Sky News.
We interrupt this press conference to bring you some breaking news from the heart of government. The Defence Secretary John Healey has in the last few minutes resigned from the Cabinet in an excoriating letter to Sir Keir Starmer. He tells the Prime Minister, "You have been unable and the Treasury unwilling to commit the resources that the nation needs to defend this country at a time of rising threats." Just to repeat that news, the Defence Secretary John Healey has resigned from the government, becoming the second Cabinet resignation within the last 30 days. This is a crisis for the Prime Minister.
Yes, he says he was left with no other option than to submit his resignation as your Defence Secretary. He says he does so with great regret and reluctance, but he's been pushed into this position to resign from government as a Cabinet Minister. Mark White is going to join us to discuss this. Mark, this is a huge moment for this government.
It's difficult to, overstate just how very significant this is. You've got a government that's been coming under increased pressure in recent months because of its failure to publish this long-awaited defence investment plan. Now, remember that a year ago now, more than a year ago, we had the Defence Review, which was setting out the priorities for defence in the years ahead. Then the Defence Investment Plan is all about how they're going to fund that. The ships that we'd buy, the planes that we would buy and manufacture, the submarines, all of the above. How we are going to pay for it, and the factories, for instance, all of those in the defence sector eagerly awaiting that Defence Investment Plan so that they can go ahead with the orders certain and employ the people to work on these projects. And companies have been going to the wall because they've not been getting the certainty from the government. And it's clear that what has been happening is this almighty row behind the scenes between the Defence Department, between the Treasury and other government departments who are now being asked to try and make cuts to provide the money for that defence budget, because the Treasury has been playing hardball with defence, despite the fact that our Prime Minister has been all around the world on the international stage, telling the world what a responsible international leader he is, that with the changed environment around the world, that Britain is investing heavily now in defence, that putting its money where its mouth is. Well, it hasn't. That's
and on that point,
fact.
Mark, we now have a picture of the rather long resignation letter John Healey has written on the screen. You mentioned the Prime Minister has been saying we need to increase spending. This letter gives us a little bit of an insight into what those behind-the-scenes discussions were. John Healey writes, without a defence investment plan that meets the moment, I am being forced to make decisions that would reduce the readiness of our forces and increase the risk to personnel on operations that could make this country less safe. He then goes on to say, in the most extraordinary way, after explaining this to you, Prime Minister, that I would not be able to accept a defence investment plan settlement that does not give the forces the resources they need, I am now left with no other option than to submit my resignation as your Defence Secretary.
It's absolutely devastating. If it were any other government and any other Prime Minister, you would think that such a devastating letter like that to the Prime Minister, whose first responsibility is the defence of the realm, would do for that Prime Minister. That would be the end of that Prime Minister. But we know with Sir Keir Starmer, he has been battling on various challenges against his leadership and calls for him to go. He's not going anywhere, and I think this will be treated as one more obstacle for him to overcome, but there is no getting away from it. This is a deep crisis now for this government. We are in a situation where one of the most senior cabinet ministers, a defence secretary, okay, it's not one of the great offices of state, that's the Chancellor, the Foreign Secretary and the Home Secretary, but it's up there, it's definitely next in line. And as I say, the first duty of any government is the defence of the realm. We have known what a parlous state our defences have been in for some very considerable time. The government has told us, he stood the Prime Minister on lectern after lectern, telling us about how this government is investing. Here is the Defence Secretary, now former Defence Secretary, calling him out, effectively saying, you are telling untruths, you are not putting your money where your mouth is and investing in the defence of this country that you said you were going to do.
And he hasn't been able to show the authority to tell other departments, sorry, you're going to have to cut your spending a little bit so we can put it in defence.
Yeah.
So shall we speak to Catherine Forster, our chief political correspondent, because she's on the line now for us. Catherine, an incredibly significant resignation from Cabinet.
Yes, a huge moment this. I was literally just coming out of the lobby briefing with the Prime Minister's official spokesman when John Healey put this letter on X. I have to say, I'm not really surprised, because I was at an Auckland summit just yesterday afternoon with the Defence Secretary, the Foreign Secretary and their Australian counterparts. John Healey was asked very directly about the level of defence spending. Remember that we have pledged to get to 5% of GDP spent on defence by 2035. That was a demand of Donald Trump. That was agreed at the NATO summit in The Hague last summer. But all the government has said is that we will get to 3% sometime in the next Parliament. So that could be by 2034. John Healey, the Defence Secretary, has long been saying internally, this is not going to cut it at all. We need to get to 3% more quickly. We need to get to 3% in this Parliament, because look at the threats we face from Russia, increasingly, of course, but also what's going on in the Middle East, China. The world is much more dangerous and uncertain. He said that yesterday. He clearly looked to me very uncomfortable, as I think he has done for a long time, because he's had to defend a slowness in the government's movement that he felt was indefensible. The Prime Minister keeps talking about going further and faster on defence spending. I was at the Munich Security Conference when he said it. He talks a good game, but the reality is not matching the rhetoric at all. And so, you know, we're now hearing that this defence investment plan that should have been out last autumn, potentially only getting 13.5 billion. That's not even half the 28 billion that military bosses say is an existing black hole just to keep up with our existing commitments. So a huge problem for the Prime Minister. But look, let's face it, this is a Prime Minister who is on his way out. There is a by-election in a week's time. Even if somebody doesn't win that by-election who we think might, I'm trying to be very careful by what I say, there is going to be a leadership challenge to the Prime Minister one way or another. But this is a huge moment, but I have to say one that I think has been coming for a very long time.
Catherine, just on that point of a potential leadership election, I was shocked reading this letter just how pointed and personal it is about the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, saying that they have taken decisions that will make this country less safe, that will put our armed forces personnel in harm's way on operations. I mean, these are the most serious charges that you can make. And to make about a cabinet colleague or two cabinet colleagues in the form of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, I mean, this is incredibly damning stuff.
Yes, it really is. And we know that there has been pretty much an open war going on between the Ministry of Defence, the number 10, and the Treasury. We know that Rachel Reeves doesn't want to find the money that has been asked for. We know that potential of 1% cuts across departments to long-term infrastructure, capital budgets, more money potentially coming out of transport, more money potentially coming out of energy, no money, it seems, coming out of the welfare budget. They seem to have given up on that for now. But look, when the Strategic Defence Review was published I think it was last June, I was up in Glasgow for it, even at that time, defence bosses were saying that this wasn't enough and that the government was moving too slowly. We are a year on from that, and this defence investment plan which was supposed to lay out where the money was going to come from. We were literally in the lobby briefing just now talking about it, and they told us the details are still being finalised. The details are still being finalised about 9 months after it should have been published. I'm afraid I don't have enough hands because I'm not an octopus, so I can't read John Healey's letter on my phone and hold my umbrella at the same time. But yes, very, very personal. He feels this very deeply. The first duty of government is to keep its citizens safe, and military figures will say, look, the world is incredibly dangerous. We have to spend a lot more on defence, and frankly, we're being left behind by our European allies. Poland's already spending about 4.8% of GDP on defence. The closer you get to Russia, the more countries are spending. But Germany, that was asleep at the wheel for so long, has embarked on a massive borrowing programme and is rearming at pace. We used to sort of lead the way in terms of defence spending relative to other NATO countries. Sure, we had that peace dividend. We didn't think we needed to spend so much for a long time, and the armed forces definitely were hollowed out. But since Russia invaded Ukraine, the peace dividend is over. The world has changed. Donald Trump came in and said, you're going to spend 5% or I'm out of NATO. Everyone has agreed to do that. But this government has kicked that massive amount of defence spending into the long grass, and the consequences that I would say are very serious, and pretty well respected Defence Secretary has said that he has had enough, and he has handed in his resignation.
Yes, a man who has continuously defended the Prime Minister in the media and elsewhere. Catherine, we'll finish with you for now, but please do hang around there, because we're going to speak to the former Conservative Home Office Minister, Anne Widdecombe. And it's interesting, yesterday's PMQs brought into fresh focus as a result of this resignation. Kemi Badenoch yesterday pushing on where is this defence investment plan. Now we hear that John Healey had sight of it on Monday afternoon and has since decided not up to scratch.
Well, it quite obviously isn't up to scratch and hasn't been for a very, very long time. It's not just the Labour government. The Tories before them, the coalition before that, have just gradually run down defences because it was easy money. As you say, there appeared to be a peace dividend, particularly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Cold War. But it's always the case, always, and has been throughout history, that a new enemy arises upon the old. And the fact that we suddenly had, apparently, some leeway in defence spending as a result of the end of the fall of communism, didn't ever mean, and shouldn't ever have meant, that we weren't going to need to guard ourselves in the future. And now it's all coming home to roost. I don't blame John Healey. I really don't blame John Healey at all. I think he is right about the Prime Minister, but I also think you can make those same points to a series of Prime Ministers before him.
What is most extraordinary, perhaps, about all of this is the jiggery-pokery that the Ministry of Defence and the Treasury has played with these figures for some time now, including pension spending in our percentage of GDP spend figure, including the Secret Intelligence Service spend in the latest budget now in this figure too. It does seem that they have been boosting this in every way that many other countries haven't been, by fiddling with the numbers. And now, even with these fiddled numbers, they cannot get to the promise of spending that they have made, not just to this country, but to the world.
Yes, I mean, the emphasis should be on the armed services, on the reserve, on weaponry and equipment. That's where all the emphasis should be. And no amount of playing about can alter the fact that our armed forces at the moment are not fit for purpose, not because they themselves are not fit for purpose, but because they're not properly equipped and they haven't got the right numbers. And if there were to be an emergency tomorrow, we would be very hard put in this country to stand to. We certainly couldn't defend the Falklands. We haven't got a navy worth speaking of at any rate. All our ships are in dock, and it is a farce. And yes, it's going to need, because it is a farce, it's going to need some very high emergency spending, which is going to elbow other stuff off the table. And all I can say is tough, because as several people have commented in the course of this bulletin, The first duty of any government of any country is to keep its citizens from harm, and that is not happening.
Now, we've been hearing for weeks, Anne, haven't we, how the government, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor have been trying to get some money, trying to see which departments might give them a little bit, got the begging bowl out across departments. What does this tell us about the Prime Minister and the Chancellor in terms of their authority, that they can't convince their colleagues, can't convince cabinet ministers that they need to cut a little off other spends in order to fund the defence of our realm?
Well, indeed, what does it say about their authority? But also, what does it say about their determination, or rather, lack of determination? Now, you know, when you have a major crisis, as we did with COVID, for example, you can find the money to deal with it. Governments can always find the money. They may have to borrow, but they can find the money. And that should have all been dealt with. And then you look at what cuts you can make. And actually, you don't wait to get agreement with individual secretaries of state if they're not cooperating, if they are, fair enough. If they're not cooperating, if they're resisting any incursions into their own department's budgets, you just simply go ahead, because
so, Anne, is this an ideological problem then, that the Labour government simply doesn't believe defence is as important as welfare, for example?
I think that might have been the case, but I think they have gradually woken up to the fact with Ukraine, with Iran, with everything else that's gone on, that the world actually isn't quite as stable as it may once have been, and that they do have some sort of duty. Now, you're never going to get a Labour government to prefer defence over welfare, but you can get a Labour government to acknowledge when defence has fallen too far behind. And that is what has semi-happened, but it hasn't happened to the extent that John Healey quite rightly wants.
And perhaps there's a distinction that here needs to be made between the Labour government and Labour parliamentarians, because, of course, it was the Chancellor who tried to cut the enormous growth in benefits spending a year and a half ago and faced an overwhelming defeat in the Commons, despite the government's massive majority. This is really instructive, because if the Prime Minister is changed, if Keir Starmer falls, as today looks more likely with another cabinet resignation, well, whoever becomes the next Prime Minister will still be dealing with the same MPs. And these MPs have been blocking just about any spending cut from just about any direction.
Oh, look, it's very simple. You do what John Major did when he was faced with rebellion after rebellion over Maastricht. And then risk the loss of business practically every day because of the size of the majority. You do what he did. And he said, OK, now we'll call a general election. Now, nobody was up for that because we were going to lose. And Labour would lose massively if there were a general election. Now, the Prime Minister does have certain arrows in his armour, and it's time he started using them.
I mean, this is a serious situation for the Prime Minister now. Anne Widdecombe, thank you indeed for joining us and talking through just this extraordinary news. Really appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you, Anne. We'll return to the studio to Mark White, our Home and Security editor. Mark, the Prime Minister, will this have come as a shock?
It may well have done. I mean, obviously, there have been huge pressure and arguments behind the scenes with his Defence Secretary. And in fact, just this morning, we had a letter that was submitted to the Prime Minister from the Chief of the Defence Staff, Sir Richard Knighton, expressing real concern at what the settlement appears to be, £13 billion. It's not going to be nearly enough to deal with the real issues that the Ministry of Defence is grappling with. There's a £28 billion black hole that needs to be sorted just over the next few years to keep the defence of this country and the armed forces operating the tempo it is at the moment, which is way below the tempo that it should be at a time, of course, when we are facing very significant issues in the Middle East and in Ukraine, with two wars raging there that are taking a further toll and strain on the armed forces of this country, because we're involved in both. We're involved, of course, in sending planes and aircraft, ships and personnel out to the Middle East, the war that's raging in Iran. We've got a peace at the moment of sorts, but we're still seeing fighting between the US, America, Iran, and indeed Israel as well, and some real concern that might deteriorate even further. And then with Ukraine, well, huge resources that are being committed to Ukraine, munition stocks, for instance, that are being depleted from our core munition stocks for the armed forces in this country to go to Ukraine. So some real concerns that the armed forces, the Defence Department was grappling with anyway, and they have that black hole, and the settlement of 13 billion just doesn't cut it. There's a key couple of paragraphs in the letter, the resignation letter from John Healey to the Prime Minister that allude to this, talking about the Defence Investment Plan. And specifically about, he says, the excellent, extensive cross-government work that was completed in January, overseen by you, me and the Chancellor. That work, he said, confirmed the scale of the challenge and the rising demands on defence. Since then, though, he says, you have been unable, and the Treasury has been unwilling to commit the resources that the nation needs to defend the country at this time of rising threats.
He says it's only that Keir Starmer's only offered a 0.08% increase by 2030. I mean, doesn't show much of a commitment, does it?
No,
it's hardly surprising that he felt the need to resign.
And this is it. You can grapple and, with big figures and make them sound like huge investment, but actually, when you have structural deficits in terms of the budget of a department like Defence, they are struggling to keep their head above water as it is and to commit to what we need to keep the country safe on a day-to-day basis, never mind meeting the objectives of the Defence Review that came out a year ago. Now, we were expecting, of course, since then, the Defence Investment Plan to come out month after month after month. It was delayed and delayed, and now, of course, we know why. The fighting that's been going on between the Treasury, unwilling to commit to the money, the resource that defence needs. And now, of course, this wrangling with other government departments, not, it seems, welfare, but every other department looking for them to take maybe 1%
Kemi Badenoch trying to pin him down yesterday at PMQ.
That was really interesting.
Had a lot of foresight.
That, Kemi Badenoch
he said it's
decided...
before the NATO summit, the NATO summit.
Well, it was interesting that she decided to devote PMQs pretty much wholly to that issue of defence. The Conservatives know it's a big issue and a weak point for Labour. Labour, you know, can fight back, though, and argue that under the Conservatives, we had the armed forces hollowed out year after year after year. The big cuts in 2010, in the austerity years, it came, you know, 20-25%, some departments, under David Cameron at that time. And defence has really just not been able to re-establish itself in any meaningful way since then. And we've got the very concerning and ludicrous situation, of course, during the war in Iraq, with the need to get naval assets off to that region, of not being able to get our one air defence destroyer, because we're supposed to have 6, the others were all tied up for maintenance, to get that one air defence destroyer down there in a timely manner to help guard Cyprus from attacks from Hezbollah. Now look at the frigate fleet as well. We're supposed to have 13 frigates. They're old, ageing Type 23s. We've gone down to 5 frigates, most of them tied up as well. We are... You know,
it wasn't long ago that John Healey was quizzed on the number of frigates we had, and he was appeared very embarrassed about
embarrassing
it.
Doesn't even cut it.
Very
it is just so frightening.
What is
the
more
level of, you know, the decay of our armed forces?
What is more damning about all of this is that in that sort of post-global financial crash era, all European countries cut back on defence spending. Indeed, we were, for a time, the highest spending Western European country on defence.
Absolutely true.
And it is now, in this era, that everyone else has caught up with the new reality, except for Britain.
Yeah.
We're the only ones... I mean, those numbers that you mentioned, that 0.08 increase, the numbers are that John Healey reveals in his letter that he was shown only on Monday afternoon, and he's the man who's supposed to be implementing this. 2.6% in 2027, rising just to 2.68% in 2030. He says the extra support is backloaded when the pressure of operations and imperatives to speed up readiness to fight in the first 2 years. I mean, this is the most extraordinary thing. It is yet again accountancy trickery, saying we will rise, but we're not going to rise this money until the next Parliament.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's complicated to get deep down into the budget calculations of the Defence Department, but you're absolutely right. What he's effectively accusing the government of is smoke and mirrors here in terms of, you know, big headline figures of what defence is getting, but the reality of it is on the tiniest of increases. It's just not anywhere near enough to be able to help the armed forces cope with what they need to. And it is a very, as I say, you know, not just embarrassing, but deeply, deeply alarming that our defences have degraded to the extent that they're at. And it's not just the Navy, which we've been talking about so much of late, but it's absolutely the Army, which have come down a few years to around 100,000 to about 70-odd thousand, the smallest army, standing army, since the Napoleonic era. The Air Force as well, struggling. We bought new F-35 stealth fighters that are supposed to be the aircraft that will be used by both the RAF and the Navy, because they'll be used on our 2 aircraft carriers, but we've only bought 48 of them. One's actually crashed into the sea, so it's been written off, and a few of them are actually, quite a few of them are used for training. Actually, frontline F-35s are not nearly enough to give proper full squadrons to the carrier strike commitment, the aircraft carriers, and then also provide a response and a resource for the RAF as well. We're supposed to be getting other tranches of the F-35 fleet, but there's been no commitment to that. We were told that we'd be getting 12 F-35As that would carry a nuclear deterrent, giving us an option away from the nuclear submarines, which is another part of our defence. The Trident submarines, the Vanguard submarines, they are very aged as well and require deep maintenance over long periods of time, which means when one of these submarines with our nuclear deterrent goes on deployment, they are gone for the better part of a year and come back in a shocking state because they are so old and decrepit and require so much maintenance when they come back. So we were moving to some degree towards aircraft, the F-35A. Well, there's some talk that that will have to be scrapped now as well because we just don't have the money.
We need some images of these, of all this equipment that you're talking about. But I do think this is an ideological issue. I really, really do. Look at the Labour Party. Every time they try to cut back on welfare, absolutely not. What's the big policy that every single minister goes out and praises? It's the free breakfast clubs. It's not, oh, we're going to make sure our armed forces are in tip-top shape, is it? No, it's always related to spending on things like benefits. That is what they cheer the most, and this is why this is neglected, in my opinion.
Well, let's go now to a statement from the Reform Party Treasury spokesperson, Robert Jenrick. He said, "This government has all the money in the world for Ed Miliband's mad plans, foreign aid and benefits for foreigners, but nothing for our armed forces. Good on John Healey, shame on them. Reeves and Starmer should go too, and with them, this wretched Labour government."
OK, well, joining us now is journalist and former British Army officer Rob Clark. Rob, there will be a lot of people watching worried. We currently don't have a Defence Secretary.
No, that's right, we don't. I imagine there'll be an appointment from Downing Street later this afternoon. Obviously, Parliament's not sitting tomorrow, so this needs to be resolved pretty urgently. The list of candidates is relatively sparse. I think the majority of people's money is either on the Procurement Minister, Luke Pollard, or the Armed Forces Minister, Al Khan's, famously the most decorated Member of Parliament, I think, in living history. So I think we can expect an announcement pretty imminently, to be fair, given the gravity of the situation and how quickly this is evolving.
I mean, Al Khan's is a name that has been mentioned a lot, someone that only got into Parliament in the last general election, and yet people speak of him as a potential next Prime Minister. I mean, it's a bit of a poisoned chalice for anyone who decides to take on this role. John Healey clearly resigned because he was presented with this defence investment plan as a fait accompli only on Monday, and this is already a plan that is 9 months late. Frankly, will anyone want the job?
Oh, sure. I mean, politicians of every stripe, first and foremost, are ambitious by nature. I think Al Khan's typifies that, particularly when you give his prior service record like the due respect it deserves. This is an incredibly ambitious man. He's gone into politics, as you say, quite late in life, and he's very new to it, having been elected in the 24 intake. I think he made the right position a couple of weeks ago, basically laying out that he would be potentially interested in a leadership contest, just to lay that out, lay the pictures, they say. But I think you're quite right. At this stage, it's a poison chalice. The Treasury is the absolute stumbling block in all of this conversation regarding defence spending and the antagonism that we see between Downing Street, the Treasury, and the Ministry of Defence. And ultimately, John Healey, a very capable politician, very senior politician, a Starmer absolute loyalist, was ultimately unable to wrangle Keir Starmer's opinion away from Rachel Reeves. I think the stumbling block will be insurmountable given John Healey's inability to change that risk calculus in Downing Street. So whoever takes it on, I think they'll have the exact same problems. But I must say, just very briefly, absolute all credit to John Healey. I'm no fan of this Labour government by any stretch. And I had my doubts over John Healey as his ability to influence change in defence. But this man has put country before party in a way we haven't really seen, certainly in my adult lifetime. And I must give him all credit for this. And I think most politicians are going to do so as well.
Yeah, but clearly he wasn't able to persuade his colleagues that it was worth it to spend more on defence. But looking forward, Keir Starmer yesterday in PMQs saying, don't worry, the defence investment plan will be published before the NATO summit, which is in a couple of weeks' time, I believe. Now, someone is going to announce it. Will they try and tweak it now that John Healey's revealed so much that was going to be in it and how he's so disappointed in it? They can't very well publish it as it stands.
No, I mean, publish it as it stands. It currently doesn't stand at all. It has no legs. I think in terms of publishing it, look, the latest, and the Defence Investment Plan is evolving almost hourly this week. I think the latest is it's going to have some headline figures and some headline announcements made tomorrow and over the weekend. And then the actual plan itself, the document, will be unveiled either Monday or Tuesday next week. But there's still enormous tussling over the exact figure, and that figure really comes down to the uplift which the military need. There's a £28 billion black hole which the Chief of Defence Staff, Sir Rich Knighton, wrote to Rachel Reeves and the Prime Minister in January, warning them about. That's nearly 6 months ago now, and they have basically just kicked the can down the road for the best part of half a year, burying their heads under the sand. I think the final settlement is going to leave the armed forces significantly short. I mean, we're talking billions, tens of billions of pounds short just over this Parliament. And ultimately, that's what John Healey has taken the courageous political decision to resign over, knowing that wouldn't get resolved in the next few days.
It is actually, the more you think about such a shocking dereliction of duty, that 9 months has been spent haggling and finger-twiddling while there is a war raging on our continent, wars in the Middle East that we are deploying our own resources to. The world seems like it is on fire, and the politicians just talk. This was meant to be delivered months and months ago, the best part of a year ago. And still this haggling and, frankly, this inability to face up to the responsibility required of a nuclear power.
Yeah, no, quite right. You mentioned the war in Ukraine and the conflict in the wider Middle East. I think, look, we're spending a lot on Ukraine, quite rightly. This government have been quite strong on that. But regarding the Middle East, what's happening with Iran and America and Israel has highlighted significant capability gaps in our own armed forces. I think everyone can recall the embarrassment and the really poor handling of the communications behind it, sending HMS Dragon, our only deployable Type 45 destroyer, after our sovereign base in Cyprus was already attacked. So I think we can see the capabilities that we're incredibly, short of, and those gaps that are just becoming exasperated by current conflicts. And again, to go back to Healey and why this matters, in his resignation letter, he made the point that Russia will be capable in about 2 years' time, 2 to 3 years, I think he said 2030, of attacking either the UK or NATO. Nobody's expecting a full-on invasion of the United Kingdom, although stranger things may happen. It's the fact that the capabilities that we need to protect, even below the threshold of conflict, have been completely stripped out because of the lack of investment, because of the lack of planning. And again, Healey's letter blames that quite clearly, squarely on Keir Starmer, not taking the political leadership needed. And that's all it is. That's all it is. We're talking about political leadership. This isn't the biggest crisis to resolve. We just don't have a political leader who's capable politically of resolving that crisis.
Rob, what does this do for morale for those in the armed forces?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still a serving reservist, and I've got plenty of friends who are still in the full-time regular forces. And it is this feeling that they are being sold down the river. It's this feeling that people are going to be left, not particularly now, although, like I say, we can see those gaps occurring, particularly in the Middle East. But over the next 2 to 3 years, that's when there's going to be real issues. So, for example, if we have to deploy meaningful forces, hypothetically, to Ukraine in a post-conflict scenario that the UK government have, expressed the aspiration to do, they're not going to have the resources to do it. I'll give you one very quick example. Ajax, the armoured infantry fighting vehicle, has been delayed by about 7 years, and it's still 5 to 6 years away from even remotely being operational. In the meantime, the vehicle it's due to replace, the Warrior, is actually being decommissioned this year. So we're going to have a 5-year period minimum where we don't have enough infantry fighting vehicles. That's a fact. And that's going to leave, like I say, the infantry and the armoured corps completely, almost seemingly redundant, which is just the most breathtaking, scenario I can imagine.
Just astonishing. Now, there's one name that we haven't mentioned in all of this so far in this conversation, and that's Donald Trump. Donald Trump has been incredibly critical, of course, of European powers that have not been spending enough on defence. In less than a month, European leaders meet with the United States president at the Ankara NATO summit. That occurs on the 7th of July. The Prime Minister is due to go there, as is Emmanuel Macron, Friedrich Merz, Mark Rutte, of course, and Donald Trump, all the rest of them. The Prime Minister is going to be in for an absolute earful.
Oh, he's going to get eaten for breakfast. I think one of the saving graces of the Starmer government, particularly regarding defence, was Healey himself. He was seen as capable, he was respected by allies, and interestingly, that included Pete Hegseth, the US Secretary for War. They had a very good relationship. With him gone and out of the picture, that again just erodes Starmer's ability to, hold his own at these very, very senior, very meaningful international exchanges. The US have been repeatedly saying for years, way before Trump, excuse me, that the UK and Western Europe in general aren't paying enough into, their own security. And again, coming back to this letter, we can see that that's exactly what's happened. People have been calling for this for, myself, for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. Many other commentators have. And hopefully, my one hope is Healey's resignation is the final straw to really highlight to this government that they have to change course. We spend 5 times as much on social security as we do on actual security. The welfare budget is set to balloon by 42 billion extra pounds in this parliament alone. We're only asking, or defence are only asking, for an additional 28 over that same period. The hope is that this may just change that calculus in Downing Street. My personal opinion is I don't think it will.
You don't think it will? Well, Rob Clark, thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. We'll see what happens on that front. But let's speak to our chief political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who's at Downing Street. Catherine, political reaction to this news?
Well, this is pretty disastrous, isn't it? I think there is a sense of shock. John Healey was very well thought of and well respected. I'm frankly not surprised, but this comes at the worst possible time because not only is the NATO summit in Turkey at the beginning of July when Donald Trump will be there, we're also expecting Donald Trump to be with the Prime Minister and other members of the G7 next Tuesday and Wednesday in Evian in France. Now, Donald Trump made it very clear when he came in that he expects NATO countries to spend 5% on defence. They agreed to that last summer, but that is by 2035. Now, Donald Trump may have not been paying close attention to the sort of details of how countries are going to arrive at that, but the fact that the Defence Secretary has gone fundamentally saying that the government is not providing enough money to keep its citizens safe is inevitably going to reach him. And I think if he starts to look at the details of where we are, he's likely to be horrified because, yes, the government are boosting defence spending by the biggest amount since the end of the Cold War. Well, we're living in much more dangerous times. They're due to get to 2.6% next year. But what John Healey has revealed in his resignation letter to the Prime Minister is that from next year to the end of the Parliament, they were only planning to add 0.08%. And he said that that absolutely wouldn't even begin to touch the sides. Fundamentally, he had been demanding that we get to 3% by 2030 at a minimum, because he is saying the threat is now, the danger is now. I've been at so many of these summits in NATO in The Hague last year and elsewhere where we've heard these really bleak warnings about the fact that Russia particularly might decide to attack a NATO ally and could do it as soon as in the next 3 to 5 years. So in kicking all this spending down the road, potentially for years, where is the sense of urgency? So I think John Healey's resignation is disastrous for this government. A Prime Minister already probably serving his last weeks or months in office, but also now the potential to seriously damage international relations with a very changeable US president who has been very, very rightly, many people would say, outspoken about what he says has been European freeloading over many years when the US has been spending a whole load of money on defence and basically European countries haven't thought they needed to because America would always be there to keep us safe. So this comes at the worst possible time. But frankly, what did the government expect to happen? This defence investment plan was supposed to be out last autumn, and the Times are now reporting that the $13.5 billion that we'd thought the Treasury were offering, less than half the $28 billion that military bosses says is a black hole, that in fact they were only being offered £10 billion over the next 4 years in cash, and the rest was a bit of basically jiggery pokery with the figures. So I think no surprise that John Healey, who I saw at a summit just yesterday afternoon looking, I thought, very, very uncomfortable, has decided that he just cannot go on defending this. And for all the Prime Minister's words of going further and faster on defence spending, as I have pointed out many times before, that rhetoric is not matched at all by the reality.
It's just pathological, because it's not just on defence spending, which is nowhere near what it needs to be, but they're saying it's record investment. House building, they say they're building millions and they're not building any. Economic growth, they say it's the best in the West and it's terrible. I mean, stopping the boats, they say they're smashing the gangs and we're getting near record numbers. I mean, almost in every element of our political life, we have politicians who seem to be living not just in another country, but on another planet.
Well, the problem is that we don't have any money, do we? We don't have the growth that we need. That's been a problem really since the financial crisis. And when the Prime Minister was in NATO in The Hague last summer, I was there, and I said to him, will you level with our viewers about the very difficult decisions that are going to have to be made to get to this 5%, 3.5% directly on defence and 1.5% defence adjacent by 2035. It's going to be very difficult. And frankly, I don't feel that he has levelled at all. And it's not going to be a few billion here off the welfare budget or a little bit of transport. These amounts of money are not going to cut it at all. If we're actually going to give this level of defence spending, we haven't funded defence like this since the mid-1980s. In the mid-1980s, our welfare budget was nothing like what it was. The NHS budget was nothing like. They were very, very different times. So I think there will be very difficult choices coming, and military bosses and people like the NATO Secretary General have basically said, you know, you have to pay now, otherwise there could be a very different price to pay, potentially, if we go to war in the future.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Catherine Forster there, our chief political correspondent.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It's now 1 o'clock on Thursday, the 11th of June. One story in town today. The Defence Secretary, John Healey, has resigned.
He has indeed, and he's issued an excoriating letter to the Prime Minister where he tells him that the defence investment plan just simply is not up to scratch and that potentially our armed forces could be put at risk as a result.
And on that defence investment plan, in his letter, John Healey says, you have been unable and the Treasury has been unwilling to commit the resources that the nation needs to defend the country at a time of rising threats. An absolutely devastating resignation letter from former Defence Secretary John Healey.
Well, let's get immediate reaction with Mark White, because, of course, this is not just a statement that reveals quite a lot. The Defence Secretary only learnt what the Defence Investment Plan was on Monday afternoon, but also reveals what was in it. Just a 0.08% rise for defence.
Yeah, and the fact is, I think John Healey, as he says in that letter, felt that he was dealing constructively with the Prime Minister, with the Treasury, as much as he could, knowing that there was deep resistance all of the way along, but that the Chancellor and indeed the Prime Minister recognised the very significant challenges that defence had, was willing to put the money where their mouth was, and actually then invest the money that defence needs. There's a £28 billion black hole. 13 billion, it seems, is the figure we're being told would be made available of additional spending. That, when you do all the jiggery-pokery and the smoke and mirrors, amounts to nothing more than 0.8% of a rise going forward in a year or two's time, according to John Healey, from 2.6 to 2.68%. Now, let's just compare that to, we were talking a few minutes ago about the fact that across Europe, where many nations had been rightly criticised for their inability and unwillingness to invest in their own defences, and that has all changed since the Ukraine war, where the vast majority are now really stepping up to the plate and are investing in their defences. Well, if we look at Germany, for instance, remember Germany? Remember how we laughed at Germany because Germany, what were they supplying to Ukraine? Helmets.
Yeah. They were conducting NATO exercises with sticks because they didn't have any guns.
So Germany's budget has gone from 2.3%, almost doubled, to 4%.
Wow.
They have put their money where their mouth is. It has gone to 108 billion euros. If you compare that to where we are in the UK, the annual budget is £62 million. In euro terms, that's about 76 million euros. So Germany is 32 billion euros more than the UK is what they are investing in their defence. A country that was very, very significantly criticised over the years for just not taking its own defence seriously and relying on allies like the United States. It was a particular bugbear of Donald Trump, who would call out Germany, who would call out other European countries. now Germany, now Poland, and so many others are investing so heavily in their defence. Of course, John Healey had hoped that Sir Keir Starmer, all too willing to fly off around the globe and talk about the deep, deep crisis that this world is facing at the moment, not just with that war raging in Ukraine, but what we're seeing playing out in the Middle East with what we know has happened in China around Taiwan and the threats there, with what we see from North Korea. You know, so many issues that militaries around the world are grappling with that Sir Keir Starmer talks so eloquently about on the international stage and gives the impression to world leaders that he is leading the way in investing in our defences, in bringing our defence up to the standard that is required to meet those threats.
It looks like Al Khan's, who we were talking about a little bit earlier, the Armed Forces Minister, has spoken out on this. He also agrees that the defence investment plan is not fit for purpose, and he's calling on the Prime Minister to sort it out. That was him speaking to another broadcaster. So it doesn't look like he will be taking on the job of Defence Secretary if indeed he was asked.
Well, I know Al Khan's former Royal Marine officer, very well respected. You know, even tipped as a potential sort of leadership candidate.
Yes,
Stalking horse, I think.
Or dark horse.
Yeah, indeed. But, you know, someone who is well respected, who cares passionately, as does John Healey, of course, about the defence of this nation. So, yes, no announcer. You would have thought if the job was going to him that he would be keeping stum, but he's not. He's out there. So it will be interesting to see what he does if this £13 billion funding settlement is what is going to the MOD. He's saying it's not enough. Will he follow his boss out the door of the MOD as well if he feels that the Prime Minister has not stepped up to the plate?
That's something to watch.
What about the Chief of the Defence Staff, Sir Rich Knighton, Air Chief Marshal? He has written to the Prime Minister as well, because clearly everyone has just got sight of what Number 10 and the Treasury were proposing would be the settlement for the MOD. And he has written to the Prime Minister saying this is not enough. Could we see the Defence Chief resigning as well? That would be just absolutely phenomenal if that was done. I mean, it's so major at the moment anyway in terms of stories.
It seems like it's all blowing up in the government's face. Just to be clear on the numbers here, the government has committed to spend 3.5% of GDP on defence by 2035. Currently, or at least in 2027, the plan is to spend 2.6. So they need to find almost a full percentage point of GDP to spend. And what the former Defence Secretary, John Healey, is saying is that this is all backloaded. So virtually none of it is coming in this Parliament. Vanishingly little of it is coming at the start of the next Parliament. And actually, if you look at 2035, that's not even the next Parliament. That's the Parliament after that. That's the point at which this money might be delivered.
And that's the point I was going to make. It's an absolutely ridiculous thing for the government to be able to boast about. Who knows which government will be in office after the next election? It could be this government. In all likelihood, it might not be this government. And then have they committed to going to 3.5? We just don't know. That's, I mean, talk about kicking it into the long grass. If you're serious about defence investment and decisions like that, it's got to be something that you start and move towards in this Parliament, and going to 2.6% is fine, but for the structural black hole, which basically cancels out that increase of a few percentage points on your GDP, it needs to be far more and far quicker. So it needs to be a process that is not just spoken about, but actually underway within this government, the move to beyond 3% of GDP.
And this is what John Healey writes in his letter, that all of this money is backloaded when the need is front-loaded. The risk is now. He writes, it's imperative to speed up readiness to fight is in the first 2 years. And yet it looks like we're not getting this actual money until the very last few years.
The biggest issue that the MOD is facing at the moment, of course, is the fact that equipment is falling to pieces in key areas, like within the Navy. Our frigate fleet, it's the ageing Type 23 frigates, which, some of these vessels are 30 years old, and they are just not fit for purpose anymore. We've got new frigates that are coming through. But because of decisions taken by previous administrations, they were delayed, so they're coming to the game late. The first of those new frigates, which will be very impressive, is not going to be in the water and fully commissioned and able to be a fighting warship until at least another 2 years. We have only got 5 frigates at the moment. We'll have a couple, if we're lucky, by that time, within 2 or 3 years from now. It is.
How many should we have?
We should.
In an ideal world, how many should we have?
So, ideally, the figure that defence chiefs had felt was a credible minimum deterrent would be 30 warships, frigates and destroyers. Instead, that was cut and cut and cut, so that basically you got down in the Cameron government to 19 frigates and destroyers. So that was 13 frigates and 6 destroyers. We still have the 6 destroyers. The frigates, as I say, are aging and going out of commission. So we're down to just 5 there. So we have in total, in terms of warships, and remember, most are actually tied up and undergoing maintenance for, the complex pieces of machinery. And the older they get, the more maintenance they require.
Don't they?
So there are 9 ships. So from that figure,
were they just hoping that we wouldn't need them? That we'd be able to do without?
So this all comes back to what they described as the peace dividend, which, has been well worn over the years. And that was basically, for those that don't know, was the fall of the Soviet Union, basically. And at that time, in the early 90s, people thought, well, here we are. Russia is no longer the threat. There's no Soviet Union. It's not the threat it was. So that gave governments since then the excuse of just salami slicing the defence budget, because that's the easy one. You don't really notice it. You notice if you can't get a doctor's appointment. You notice if your school is falling to pieces or you can't get enough teachers and things. You notice those things. People don't as much notice the fact that there's not 19 or 30 frigates and destroyers anymore. There's only, 18 or whatever there might be. So that budget from the Defence Department just got salami sliced year after year after year, to the point where you can only hollow out your armed forces to a certain extent before they become operationally dysfunctional. And that's where we are now, where we had that very embarrassing and worrying spectacle during the fighting in the Iran war, with Cyprus coming under attack and us struggling to get the one air defence destroyer that was available to be sent in a timely manner down to Cyprus. We should say that issue is not resolved. The government of Cyprus, understandably, very, very angry over that, and having serious discussions about whether they allow Britain to continue having 2 military bases on Cyprus, RAF Akrotiri, of course, being the most dominant and prominent of those bases. So that's the kind of issue that's been rearing its head more and more. We hear about the state that the aircraft carriers are in. Well, they're complex pieces of equipment. You understand that they go in for maintenance. But what's more worrying about our aircraft carriers is they take to sea and go off on these deployments, and they're supposed to have 2 frigates and 2 destroyers and backup vessels. They've been going to sea with 1 frigate, 1 destroyer, and we've been using our allies to make up our carrier strike group. And then you get the politicians, again, just trying to hoodwink us into thinking that this is a positive thing. What we're doing is we're working even more closely with our allies, when the truth of the matter is we don't have our own assets to have a proper, credible carrier strike group, and we need other nations to come in and help us out.
Well, on that point, Mark, this is just the most enormous news day. We've just had reaction from the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, following the former Defence Secretary John Healey's resignation. Let's listen in.
OK, Kemi Badenoch, John Healey has resigned. Are you surprised?
I am not surprised. John Healey has done the honourable thing. Yesterday, I raised the issue of the Defence Investment Plan, and the Prime Minister exposed the fact that he was not going to put money into defence to the amount that was required. And I'm sure John Healey sat there listening to the Prime Minister tell me that he was increasing defence funding when he is not. He has done the honourable thing and resigned. I am glad that he agrees with me that we need to put more money into defence. But what is shocking is what he's written in his letter, where he says that the Prime Minister is making the country less safe and putting our troops at risk at a time of increasing threats.
He said that the increase amounted to 0.08% of GDP compared to the current investment plans. I mean, we knew the situation was tight, but does that level of increase surprise you, how small it is?
I was shocked that the Prime Minister was putting so little money into defence after the Strategic Defence Review last year explained that we needed about 28 billion. That was before the war in Iran started. They are spending all of their money on welfare, all of our money, I should say. This Labour government is only interested in spending money on welfare. We need to take the money out of welfare and put it into funding our defence. That is why the Defence Secretary has now resigned, because he knows that this is true.
What should the Prime Minister do now?
The Prime Minister should stop increasing welfare spending. He has got a welfare plan to 2031, where we're expected to be spending £200 billion. He does not have a defence investment plan. I asked him yesterday at Prime Minister's questions, and he pretended that he was funding the defence investment plan in the way that the armed forces require. He is not. He is putting in less than half of the minimum required, and that is why the Defence Secretary has resigned. We have a plan to put more money into defence. I have offered to work with the Prime Minister to get our country into a safer place. He is more interested in saving his job and looking after the Labour Party than putting the national interest first.
With everything else that's happened in the last month or two, is it possible that Keir Starmer could now be the person that actually sees through a meaningful defence investment, or does this speak to his own job?
Keir Starmer's premiership is falling apart. His health secretary resigned 2 weeks ago. His defence secretary has resigned at a critical time when we are facing global threats. And he is doing so because the Prime Minister is trying to please his backbenchers by putting money into welfare instead of defence. We need to start funding defence. We need to get to 3% of GDP by the end of this Parliament. I've set out some of the ways we can do that: reinstating the two-child benefit cap, a sovereign defence fund. I've explained where the money comes from. Keir Starmer has no plan whatsoever. I don't see how he can stay in this job. He can't run the country. He is paralysed because his backbenchers only want to spend money on welfare.
And very finally, the Conservatives haven't got an amazing record on defence. Your own former Defence Secretary said that you hollowed it out. How can we trust that a Conservative government would put more money into defence?
What he said is that successive governments, Labour, Conservative and Liberal Democrats in coalition from 1989, did not increase defence spending because we thought we had a peace dividend. When I was in Cabinet in 2022, defence spending went up because of the war in Ukraine, and it has continued to do so, but not by enough, which is why we are telling Labour that they need to put more money into defence. We need to start thinking about what we do now and about the future. There's only one party that is even talking about cutting welfare spending and increasing defence spending, and that is the Conservative Party. Everybody else is burying their heads in the sand. That is why I asked Keir Starmer about this yesterday at Prime Minister's questions. The reason why the Defence Secretary has resigned is because I exposed that the Prime Minister does not have a plan on defence and is making our country less safe.
Kemi Badenoch, thank you.
Well, that was the leader of the Conservative Party, leader of His Majesty's most loyal opposition, Kemi Badenoch, really slamming the government there for this crisis, and I think we can call it a crisis at this point.
But also attempting to defend the Conservatives' record, put to her that it was the Conservatives that hollowed out defence, so that's Certainly a charge that's levelled at the Conservatives. Shall we speak to the former Defence Minister, James Heappey? James, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Your reaction to this breaking news?
Well, I think it's a very honourable thing to do. It is not an easy thing to do, to resign from government on a matter of principle. But I suppose that if you know from your service chiefs, who you sit down with around the big meeting table in the MOD every single day, that the gap between the programme that you've already agreed to, remember that's a key point. This isn't about new money for new things. This is simply what's been agreed to so far is 28 billion. And if your national security advisor and your cabinet secretary have written to you to say that the absolute floor for funding defence is 18 billion, and then you're offered 13, you've kind of got no choice, because to go back to the MOD and look the chiefs in the eye and say, I'm sorry, guys, but we're going to need to find 15 million in reductions from your budget, 15 billion in reductions from your budgets, that's just untenable. So John has done the right thing, but it's also the inevitable thing too.
Similar battles, your time in the MOD?
Yeah, and look, this is the real thing that needs to be looked at. There is an institutional resistance in the Treasury to funding defence properly. And that is something that John has been running against since he got into power. It is something that the defence secretaries that I served were running against whilst they were in office. It is, I don't know why it happens. I don't know why HMT are so resistant to accept the threats that our country faces and the necessity to fund defence properly as a consequence. But under governments of all colours, they again and again show that they are entirely resistant to that need.
Is the political reality here not really quite simple? If you spend on schools and hospitals, people see that in their constituencies. If you spend on the armed forces and on faraway conflicts, that's not immediately felt.
Yeah, I mean, that's a statement of the obvious, yes. I think the job of government, therefore, is to be a bit more honest with the public about the threat. And in fairness, that's been a theme now since the re-invasion of Ukraine in 2022. I think government has been ever more honest with the public, and you can see the public's perception of threat getting ever stronger. But if you're going to explain the threat to them, you've then got to do the next bit, which is to say, and the so what, is that actually your hip replacement might take a bit longer to be delivered on the NHS because we need to buy some more warships, or your kids' class size at school might still have to be a bit bigger because we need to buy some more fighter jets. That's the bit that the government I served in and the government that's in office now have shied away from. I was sent out onto the news just after I'd left government to support a spending increase that Rishi Sunak had committed to. And the line I was given was that it was all going to be funded by civil service efficiencies. The thing that everybody was terrified to discuss was that there might need to be any trade-offs in public services in order to fund defence. And yet, inevitably, that is what is necessary.
And yet this government has found £18 billion more to spend on welfare. And yet this government has withdrawn from any discussion about how much more money is being spent on pensions. I mean, these aren't even about this isn't even about cutting other departments. This is about how much we increase other departments by. And those discussions seem just like they're not even on the table.
No, Tom, I would agree with you. I mean, it's easy to be wise after the event. I'm no longer a practicing politician. In fact, I keep out of politics as much as I possibly can nowadays. And it's easy to sit here now as a commentator and as a business person and say, be honest with the public and trust the public are grown up enough to understand the trade-off they're being asked to make for the sake of our national security. But when you are in politics, and crucially, when there are sort of populists to the left and right of you who are lying to the public and saying that trade-off isn't necessary, then it's a different situation and it's a much harder argument to make. To sort of break ranks and abandon the triple lock, for example, to use the pensions example you used, really hard to do that unilaterally as a political party when other parties would delight in trying to tell the public that there was another way to fund defence properly.
Yeah, I mean, Labour politicians feel far more comfortable. They love talking about free breakfast clubs paid by the taxpayer, but not so much about defence spending, it seems. But I believe it was the last time we spent more than 3% on defence in this country was in 1994. Conservative governments has always been around the 2.4, 2.3, 2.5 mark. Why do you think the Conservatives didn't take this issue seriously enough?
Well,
you can speak to that. What sort of conversations were you having at that time when you were pushing for more defence spending? Was it just, sorry, we don't have the cash? Was it, no, we need that for this, we need that for that, sorry, make do with what you've got?
Yeah, they'd point to the focus groups, point to the polling, and tell you that defence doesn't win votes. And Tom's analysis just then was on the money, right? I mean, the fact is that in an election campaign, promising to drive down NHS waiting lists is more potent than saying we're going to have a better Navy. The only problem is that Putin gets a vote as well, and his threat might seem to just be kind of rhetoric from people like me who can come across sometimes as alarmist, but he is posing the greatest threat to European security that we've seen since well before the fall of the Berlin Wall. This is a sort of pre-Glasnost perestroika type sort of threat. And Europe is, getting its arse in gear. But unfortunately, the country that is now lagging behind is the United Kingdom. In my business life, I spend more time in Berlin and Warsaw doing things for the companies I now work for than I do in London. That's where the money is being spent. And as a Brit, that's quite embarrassing.
Incredibly embarrassing. I mean, it wasn't always this way. Sorry if this is a slightly tangential point, but back in the budget of 1909, there were popular campaigns for dreadnoughts, for spending on the Navy. There was a slogan, "We want 8 and we won't wait," in terms of the new ships that the Royal Navy should have. It feels like a completely different world when the public actually cared about the size and the scope of our armed forces.
And if we were genuinely honest with them about the threat, and we told them what that meant fiscally, and we set out to them that this is about deterrence. This is about paying upfront what is needed to restore our armed forces to the level that means that no one takes us on. And that's really what we're being asked to. That's why you can't just wait for the war to come. War is really expensive, both in terms of blood and treasure. And when war comes, missiles and bombs are landing on the UK homeland, taking lives here. It's not a faraway war like the ones that we've been funding in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is here. This is British cities and towns being bombed by our adversary. Now, to make sure that that doesn't happen, you have to restore your deterrence. Now, we've got our nuclear deterrent. That remains untouched and is a magnificent thing delivered by our submariners. But our conventional deterrence has been almost completely lost since the end of the Cold War. We've invested our military only really to deliver the sort of mission that we had in Iraq and Afghanistan. And as Ben Wallace said when he was Defence Secretary, and I repeated the line many, many times over, that was nobody's fault. The advice at the end of the Cold War, there were select committees in Parliament demanding that the MOD in the late 90s and the early 2000s stopped being so wasteful by having all of these duplicate sites for bombing up warships or storing ammunition, because that appeared to be a wasteful logistic effort in peacetime. But of course, in war, that is your resilience. It means that you are much harder to defeat. You can't be taken out of the battle with one missile strike. So nobody did anything wrong, but now faced with the threat that we have and the possibility that we might have to warfight again in the near future, we need to show our adversary that we are ready for that, because in doing so, paradoxically, we make war less likely.
Yeah, I just worry that there's some kind of imminent invasion in order for this to be front and centre. James Heappey, thank you very much indeed for your time. Former Conservative MP and former Armed Forces Minister.
Well, this is just the most extraordinary day of news. I wonder if it takes something like this, if it takes a cabinet resignation to perhaps have people wake up to the very real risks that this country faces, and frankly, the underinvestment that our armed forces have had for quite some time.
Well, Tom, we were just discussing, weren't we, before we spoke to James Heapy, how they're going to have to change this defence investment plan. No self-respecting future defence secretary is going to go out and reveal this to the public after it's already been revealed by a former defence secretary who's now resigned.
Yeah.
Mark White's still in the studio. Do you have something to say, Mark?
Yeah, you mentioned there was really interesting. Thank you for the history lesson on the dreadnought battleships,
we
which
love an
really
arms
were
race.
beasts. And you know, we want 8, whatever the catch.
We want 8, and we won't wait. That was ahead of the People's Budget of 1909.
Was that before women were allowed the vote?
That was before women were allowed.
So this is relevant today.
I thought you'd enjoy that one. A little bit of sexism for you in the afternoon.
This is relevant right here, right now, because that dreadnought name is resurfacing as our future nuclear deterrent submarines. The dreadnought class are being built as we speak. But the budget, just to give you an idea of just how huge and vast these capital investment programmes are for defence, the cost of the nuclear deterrent, the dreadnought submarines and accompanying missiles, is £41 billion. So given that the annual defence budget for the armed forces in the UK is currently £62 billion, that's, you know, the better part, what, 80% or so of the entire budget for the UK armed forces in a year to build just these 4 submarines for our nuclear deterrent. And they are badly needed because of the fact that the current Vanguard class of submarines that carry our nuclear deterrent are very ageing and require long periods of maintenance.
And some speculation in terms of whether the Trident missiles they carry actually work. I mean,
I think they work, but they've carried out tests and sometimes they've failed.
And that's the problem with the deterrent. If there's even a little bit of doubt in an adversary's mind about the effectiveness of that deterrent, that decreases its use.
And the adversary sees, for instance, the fact that these Vanguards, when they go out in deployment, because the rest of the fleet, there's just 4 of them, are requiring such intense long maintenance periods. When a Vanguard submarine goes out, it goes out for the better part of a year, comes back all covered in barnacles and God knows what that needs to be scraped off. And these poor sailors, submariners, have been away from their families for so very long because of the state that the nuclear deterrent fleet is in. That's why we need the dreadnought fleet. But as I say, that's going to be £41 billion. On today's estimates, it will increase significantly. And also, of course, it's going to create many thousands of jobs in the likes of Barrow and Furness up in Cumbria and other factories that are linked to the supply chain. So it's needed, and you've got a whole sector, you've got industry right across the country that rely on this investment as well. The less the government puts in terms of investment in defence, the less investment these companies have in terms of their own futures and employment in the areas that they operate in.
Just to note, the political editor at The Telegraph is saying that Labour sources are talking about Dan Jarvis potentially stepping up to the role. So we'll keep an eye on that. But in the meantime, the Shadow Defence Secretary James Cartledge has just released a statement reacting to the news. Let's have a little look. It's just coming in one moment.
But before we get that, perhaps it's worth, because we've all been speaking about the real risks this country faces. Clearly, there is another side to this argument. There are those who say, how likely is it that we have a full-on war with Russia? How likely is it that we have bombs raining down on Manchester and London and Birmingham once more? How likely is it that Putin decides to invade NATO? He's strictly stuck to invading non-NATO countries for one reason above all else. He doesn't want to invade a nuclear power. We are a nuclear power. Does that not mean that we actually have a bit of a luxury here, that safe nuclear umbrella?
Yeah, I mean, there are those that would gamble on there not being a real significant risk to this nation going forward. But I would just add that in terms of the threats we face from hostile nations, it's not just about bullets and bombs. We are attacked every single day and have been for years now by Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, various other adversaries on the cybersphere, on our internet, cable systems that we operate here, the kind of, the system, the banking systems, NHS systems that go down from time to time because they're being attacked from an outside agency, often state-aligned attacks that are taking place. We have cables that are vital to carrying those communications around the world that get cut increasingly. We are seeing a belligerent Russia that is pushing and testing. We see it in the air on UK airspace borders, but also on NATO's borders. We see it under the sea with Russian subs increasingly encroaching on our area of interest here in the United Kingdom.
Also,
and then just look at what's actually happening in real world terms in the likes of Iran, where, okay, people in Bradford and people in, Stoke Newington and North London aren't necessarily getting caught up in this action directly, but many British citizens were caught up in the war that was raging in Iran, and it is still a very volatile area in that place, stuck for weeks in countries across the Middle East and unable to get out. Sovereign air bases in Cyprus, our main naval base in Bahrain attacked, struck, damaged by our adversaries. So we do feel it. There are real life consequences to not investing in defence when we can't then have the capabilities to offer a reasonable response if we are then facing a threat from our adversaries.
We can't help out our allies like we have done with Ukraine. You put a very strong case there. The Shadow Defence Secretary James Cartledge has just released a statement reacting to the news. Let's take a listen.
So I've just heard the news that John Healey has resigned as Defence Secretary. Now, whatever our political differences, always admired John Healey's integrity, and he's shown it in this action. He's done the decent thing. He was left with no choice. He had to resign, given that the Prime Minister was offering him such a tiny amount of money for our armed forces at a time when we face war on two fronts, the war in Ukraine and conflict in the Middle East. So he had to do this. I respect John Healey for that, but I say to the Prime Minister, with the world as it is, this is not good enough. And he is paying the price for prioritising a bigger welfare state over a stronger armed forces.
Well, what's the Prime Minister going to do? How's he going to respond to this? Is he going to rip up that defence investment plan? Is he going to add a couple of percentage points? What's he going to do?
Frankly, how long is he going to be Prime Minister?
Well,
this is another nail in his political coffin. It does seem like this government has completely run out of steam on just about every front. They can't make any big decisions. The Health Secretary has resigned, the Defence Secretary has resigned, the Safeguarding Minister resigned. I mean, how many resignations have we had across the junior levels of government? I have lost count. This is a government that is collapsing slowly, in slow motion before our eyes. And this is a Prime Minister who is not long for this political world.
Can I just add that basically, if he survives, his next significant challenge, of course, will be when he goes to Turkey, to Ankara, for the NATO summit on the 7th, 8th of July. I'm going to be in Turkey. I'm going up to Ankara for that summit. That is going to be, I would imagine, if things aren't resolved in a very significant way here, excruciating for him, because he's on a world stage with other leaders. There will be inevitable press conferences, bilateral press conferences, single press conferences, where people are obviously going to ask the question about Britain's commitment to its own defences and compare and contrast us to Germany now that has doubled effectively its military bill, is putting its budget, is putting its money where its mouth is, Poland and so many other nations in Europe that are stepping up to the plate, that the man at the centre of that summit, Donald John Trump, wants to step up to the plate. So given just how, let's say, how difficult relations are between Donald Trump and Sir Keir Starmer at the moment anyway, because of Sir Keir Starmer's response to the Iran war and his perceived failure to back the United States, let the US use its own bases here in the UK and in Diego Garcia. It might well be that Trump decides that this is an opportune moment to really let him wriggle on the end of the hook.
Stick the boot in.
You know, in a very excruciating way.
Mark,
we are a world away.
Joining us now, though, is the former Conservative MP and British Army officer James Sunderland. James, we're just talking about the NATO summit that's not in very long, in July. How might that go for the Prime Minister if he's still in place?
Well, it won't go very well. I mean, today's event, John Healey's resignation, is absolutely catastrophic for the government. Why? Because the government's been saying for months and months and months that we're investing more in defence, that this is the best government for defence, that we are rebuilding houses, we are putting troops back in uniform, we are rearming the army in particular, and fulfilling our responsibilities on the world stage. So clearly what's happened today, John Healey's resigned. He's cited a lack of money as the reason for his resignation, and I suspect that Turkey won't go well for Starmer at all.
James, do you suspect fundamentally dishonest government? Because I was listening to what you just said there, that they say all of these things to the public, and then behind the scenes to their own ministers, they say something completely different. Just a 0.08% rise for defence, when the government is describing this as a generational uplift to the public. I mean, this is complete smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, at the risk of being blunt, I mean, look at the manifesto from 2024, an absolute pack of lies. You've got the government saying one thing publicly, but it's obvious to anybody watching that there's no substance in what they're saying. Defence spending is not 2.5% today. As per John Healey's letter, it's less than that. And I'm afraid this is a smoke and mirrors government. It's spin nationally, it's spin locally. And what's interesting here, of course, is the fact that John Healey may have a number of reasons for having resigned today. Defence spending may just be one of them, but it might be indicative of the fact that this is a government that's failing, the fact that John Healey can't work with Keir Starmer anymore, and of course, this is a government that whose failure to get welfare under control means that it cannot properly protect the UK.
Party has a huge number of backbenchers who are very left-wing indeed, and who see defence as something that perhaps isn't worth investing in. So there's always a battle, and clearly Keir Starmer hasn't been able to persuade his colleagues, or indeed listen to John Healey to the extent that he's willing to actually put a bit more money in. I mean, 0.08% increase at a time where we have multiple conflicts around the world, where defence chief after defence chief, army officer after army officer is warning and warning about our depleted armed forces, and yet 0.08% by 2030.
Yeah, it's a very fair point. What's interesting, what's not often broadly understood, is the fact that defence is the one area of government where there is greatest alignment between the two front benches, one of 17 government departments. You know, most politicians are broadly aligned on the need to defend the UK. That's the first thing. And the second thing, of course, is the fact that defence spending is non-discretionary. Looking after our people, keeping a nation safe, is the primary objective of any government. So the fact that the Defence Secretary has resigned today is really significant. Who's going to come next? I don't know, but I suspect that the fiscal reality of the Treasury imposing its might upon the MOD, of closed behind doors disagreements between Rachel Reeves and other government departments, it's just the beginning, and Starmer's days are absolutely numbered.
Well, James, you mentioned who might come next. You say you don't know, but you did serve in Parliament alongside a number of the names that are in contention. We've heard perhaps Luke Pollard, perhaps Dan Jarvis. Of course, people are talking about Al Carnes as well, a new MP. What do you make of all of the contenders?
Well, look, this might surprise you, but I know them all pretty well. And, I got to know John Healey very well, Dan Jarvis very well. I know Luke Pollard is a personal friend of mine. They're actually pretty good people. They're good politicians. And, if you look at the quality on the Labour front bench for defence, it does pale into great significance in comparison to other government departments. So it's a matter for the Prime Minister. Luke Pollard could do it. Dan Jarvis, a former Army guy, could do it. There are many contenders, but my experience of this is that former defence personnel tend to have the greatest credibility with defence, with the service chiefs in particular. I think it's a combination of military experience. You need enough of that to understand what's going on, but also you need to have the right connections as well and be popular and plausible in government.
Very much indeed for your time this afternoon, former Conservative MP and British Army officer.
Thank you.
Well, joining us now is the Executive Defence and Foreign Affairs Editor at The Telegraph, Con Coughlin. Con, thanks indeed for being with us today. First of all, are you surprised by this resignation?
Because John Healey is a great Labour Party stalwart. He's served in various roles, in senior roles in the Labour Party since the Tony Blair government. And he's been very, very invested on a personal level in defence. So to give this up is a really big thing for John Healey. But as you've already discussed, the key thing here is that he just cannot accept the deal he's been offered by Starmer and the Treasury at a time when the nation is in great peril. So, it is a surprise on that level, and of course, it is also devastating for Keir Starmer, who only on Monday was hosting the president of Ukraine and bigging up, his credentials as a defender of the realm. Well, that's been blown wide open by his resignation.
That's a very good point indeed. Behind the scenes, we've been hearing for weeks that the government have been, that Keir Starmer has been asking different departments whether they can cut their budgets a little, try and save some money here and there so that he can boost defence. Clearly, he hasn't been able to persuade his cabinet ministers, persuade his cabinet that this is of the utmost priority. Do you believe that Keir Starmer was actively really trying to persuade his colleagues, or that, in his mind, this wasn't the utmost priority? Who's to blame here?
Well, I think, first of all, I would say that, let's not forget that, a very good defence review was concluded last year. The defence investment plan that's supposed to follow on from that was supposed to be announced in August last year. It's nearly a year now that this document has sat on the Prime Minister's desk. And during that year, I've lost count of the number of times Starmer's said, my first priority is the defence of the realm. Well, he's clearly done nothing about it. And if you are the Prime Minister, it is your job to provide leadership. And it doesn't matter if your Chancellor or your Environment Secretary, your net zero champion doesn't like what you want to do with defence. It is your job as Prime Minister and leader of this nation to get the job done. So he just, it's the usual thing with Starmer. He's dithered away. He has no great authority in cabinet, and the result is this terrible mess that he's got himself into. Yet another one.
And I suppose the question everyone will have on the tip of their tongue now is, well, how does he get out of this mess? Can he get out of this mess? It seems like it's not just that this is a Prime Minister and a Chancellor refusing to give money to defence, but frankly, it's 411 Labour MPs who have rebelled on just about any cut to any other department that might afford an increase in spending for defence.
Yeah, well, I think the tragedy for the nation is when you look around at who might succeed Sir Keir Starmer, the options are not very encouraging, whether it's Burnham or Streeting or Angela Rayner or even Mr Miliband. These are not people
who are very interested in the defence of the realm. These are people who want to rejoin the European Union and let the Europeans defend us. So, you know, I think we need a change of government before anybody sensible might appear who is going to take the defence of the realm seriously. And, you know, we don't have an election for 3 years, so you just wonder how much more damage can be done to our armed forces before the next general election comes round.
OK, Con Coughlin, thank you very much indeed, Executive Defence and Foreign Affairs Editor at the Telegraph newspaper.
Well, let's get the Labour point of view now. The Labour activist Aisha Ali Khan can join us live. Aisha, thanks indeed for your time. This is a bad look, however way you look at it, for the government.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Emily. So, yeah, the timing could have been a little bit better, I think. But at the same time, I understand precisely why John Healey decided to resign. There has been chronic underinvestment in our armed forces, and this is not just a Labour government issue. It has been so since 2008, sorry, and it's just continued. Where we are today is actually where we would have been in 2010. So you can imagine we've had 16 years of catching up of investment and so on. And having looked into this more clearly, I've noticed there's lots and lots of comments around upgrading the infrastructure, making it more modern, investing in modern technology. And a lot of the equipment we have is basically obsolete because obviously, the technology we have today, the high-tech technology, is just not in place, and the things that we have can't work without this upgrade. So a lot of the funding, a lot of the spending has to be done to ensure that our weaponry is up to scratch.
So, but Aisha, so we have a Prime Minister. We have a Labour Prime Minister who's gone around the world, talked about how important defence is, talked about how important it is to keep our country safe, to defend our allies, etc., how we live in an increasingly dangerous world. And then we find out from his now resigned Defence Secretary that he was only going to increase the budget by 0.08% by 2030. This man is just simply duplicitous.
It's not true, Emily. I think, obviously, two things can be true at the same time. Of course, the defence of the realm is important. Of course, we need to stand by our allies.
But clearly not to the Prime Minister if he's not willing to say to his cabinet ministers, sorry, you're going to have to find some savings here and there so we can put it into defence. He's clearly not been able to do that. So either he doesn't want to or he has no authority.
Well, look, I've not been party to discussions behind the doors, but I will say that this resignation today should come as a massive warning to going forward to whoever is in charge by the end of the year. It could well still be Keir Starmer, it could well be Andy Burnham or anybody else. There's a massive question mark. But defence spending is really important. It's important not just for our personal safety, safety of the United Kingdom, but also, like you just mentioned, Emily, to help our allies, to help
NATO.
We
know that, Aisha, but does the Prime Minister know that? Because he talks a good game on so many different issues. We say, small boats and etc., and we hear from ministers all the time that they've put money into these fantastic breakfast clubs. But he talks the talk. But he hasn't delivered, has he? And that's why his Defence Secretary has resigned. So clearly, John Healey has absolutely no confidence in him. So why should we have any confidence in the Prime Minister that he gets how important defence is?
I think what we've noticed, and we've seen this in other situations as well, that there is a power struggle behind the scenes. There is a power struggle with Rachel Reeves and obviously number 10 as well. And I think given what we're facing so much uncertainty, we've got this war in Iran that nobody asked for, that came out of nowhere, and that could well impact us. We've also got the ongoing war in Ukraine, which again, everybody thought it should be over by now, but it hasn't been. And I think it will continue for a lot longer, regardless of the situation with the Russian armed forces and the Ukrainian armed forces themselves. And as well as everything else, Emily, I do feel that just having that level of trust, and I think this is going to impact the trust that people have in our armed forces. I mean, look, just 4 days ago, we had a headline in the Telegraph talking about our nuclear submarines that are stranded, that are just not been, we just can't use them. And again, a part of that is because the equipment isn't there, the money isn't there, personnel, people who are skilled enough to work on these really high-tech warships for some reason are not there, and that basically screams lack of investment.
Well, exactly. You're explaining the problem, but not the action that's being taken by Labour. So, Aisha, thank you very much indeed. Aisha Ali Khan, thank you very much indeed, Labour activist there. I mean, Tom, they can understand the problem. They talk about it. They tell us on the international stage how important defence is. But as we've seen, the evidence is not there.
Look, Labour voices have an absolutely correct point to make, which is that this has been underinvestment for a very long time, that the austerity budgets of Alistair Darling cut defence, added the austerity budgets of George Osborne in the coalition Liberal Conservative government. Defence was not a priority since 2008. It has not been a priority and has been the first on the chopping block when savings were looking to be found. That is absolutely true. However, the problem that Labour politicians have when it comes to this is that was also true in most Western European countries, just about every single Western European countries. And in the last couple of years, just about every other country has caught up. Whereas Britain now stands as a laggard, where we haven't caught up. We haven't done what Germany's doing. We haven't done what France is doing.
Considering our past, it is an embarrassment. It could turn into a humiliation if we don't get to grips with this issue. We are going to continue on this. As we're getting further political reaction, we need to find out who Keir Starmer is going to place as his new Defence Secretary. Who will it be?
And frankly, how long can this government last? Do stay with us here on Good Afternoon Britain. Much more to come, but let's take an update on your latest weather forecast.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Boxed Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Good afternoon. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Overall tomorrow, a lot drier and a bit warmer than today. It may start fairly dull, but it should get a bit brighter, and it won't be completely dry. Still a few showers around, but not the persistent rain that many of us had through this morning from this set of weather fronts, all trying to move out into the North Sea, but leaving behind a lot of cloud, rain and drizzle, particularly over the hills and around the coasts in the west. Some of that rain just pushing its way up towards Orkney, but most of it clearing from eastern parts of England and Scotland. So becoming much drier here through the night with some clearer skies. It will be quite a warm night, particularly in the south. Temperatures holding up in the mid-teens and still quite breezy here as well. On to Friday, bit of a mishmash, certainly to start with. A lot of clouds, still some rain and drizzle across Wales, northwest England, Northern Ireland. Probably a largely dry but fairly drab start across southern counties. Still quite breezy here. Northeast England into eastern Scotland. I think the favoured spots for starting off, at least with some sunshine. A few showers continuing to come into northwestern parts of Scotland. As we go through the day, we should see skies brightening in many locations. Quite a wet morning for northwest England, perhaps, and there will still be rain and drizzle over the hills of Wales, certainly through the morning. Showers will keep going into western Scotland, blown along by a fairly brisk wind. But elsewhere, generally any rain petering out, the skies brightening, the cloud breaking up, and we'll see some decent spells of sunshine, I suspect, by the afternoon, which will lift the temperatures. A warmer day tomorrow, certainly over eastern England, with some sunshine. Temperatures likely to climb back into the 20s. More heavy showers to come through Friday evening across the northwest, but otherwise pretty pleasant Friday evening for many. Still a bit breezy for sure. The weekend starts fine. Probably quite cloudy, but some sunshine developing, and it is going to get a bit warmer through the weekend too.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Boxed Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
£76,543 and 21 pence in tax-free cash could be yours this summer. That's totally tax-free cash to spend on anything you like. And remember, because it's totally tax-free cash, you'll get to keep every single penny. For a chance to win, text cash to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go Go to gbnews.com/win. Entry starts at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB21 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 26th of June. This is a network giveaway. Entries will be pulled. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Do you trust what you're being told? Good, because neither do I.
Those are just facts.
I'm Alex Armstrong, and on my show, we'll expose the spin.
Well, I want to answer that because you didn't let me last time, because you always speak over me.
The broken promises.
To deny that is denying the truth.
And the hypocrisy.
Needs to stop. You think we can allow?
Politics, policy, parliament. Nothing is off limits. No sugarcoating, no fear of offence, just the truth laid bare. Tune in every Saturday and Sunday at 9 p.m. for Alex Armstrong Tonight, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
As soon as it hits 11 and the headlines come in,
The Late Edition brings you the breaking news from all the front pages.
because the news is going to happen.
So get a head start today.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, Late Edition.
Alex Armstrong Tonight, Late Edition. From 11 o'clock every night.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I've been in Westminster for a long time, but I know that though power may be here, its effect on people's lives is across the whole of the country. We may be where rules are made, but it's where they're implemented that matters. Join me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, for forthright and frank discussion on where Britain has come from, where it's going, and where it will end up. That's State of the Nation, Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Vox Populi, Vox Dei.
From court mornings
to warm family brunches,
from football to tennis in the car,
in the kitchen.
GB News Breakfast is there with the stories you need and the conversations that matter.
Anyway, let's talk business.
Well, it has been a historic night in British politics.
It's astonishing, isn't it? We're here again to start your day just right. GB News Breakfast.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Thursday, the 11th of June. I'm Tom Harwood.
I'm Emily Carver. Well, the Prime Minister's defence plan could make the UK less safe. Yes, the Defence Secretary has resigned. That's John Healey. This is the scathing letter that he posted online on Twitter, on X. John Healey says he has no option but to stand down.
He claims the government is unwilling to commit to necessary defence spending, a move which the Conservative Party leader, Kemi Badenoch, says is the honourable thing to do.
But what is shocking is what he's written in his letter, where he says that the Prime Minister is making the country less safe and putting our troops at risk at a time of increasing threats.
Yes, the Defence Secretary has effectively accused the Prime Minister and Chancellor of failing to spend enough to keep us safe. Incredibly damaging, and this comes at a time when the Prime Minister is set to head to the G7 just next week.
Are we witnessing a slow-motion implosion of this government?
Yeah, is this resignation more damaging, Tom, because he wasn't a loudmouth? There were no sort of petty fights going on.
He was a loyal party man.
Totally loyal, was very happy to go out onto the media airwaves, even on really difficult days, to defend the government, to defend the Prime Minister, his boss. He sent this letter in, seemingly, because he is concerned that the Prime Minister is not taking defence as seriously as he should be. Simple as.
And it's a theme, isn't it? Because In Jess Phillips' resignation letter, she says the Prime Minister was not taking child safety as seriously as he should be. In Wes Streeting's resignation letter, he was excoriating at the Prime Minister's ability to say one thing and do another. And that's another theme that we've seen today in John Healey's resignation letter. I mean, over the course of the last 30 or so days, the number of resignations that we've seen from this government, from people who had previously been loyal to this Prime Minister, who have now gone out into the open with, frankly, much more blistering letters revealing the internal workings of this government more so than in most recent resignation letters I can possibly remember. When people resigned from Boris Johnson's government, they said stuff that the public already thought. They didn't reveal the internal workings of the government in the way that this lot are.
Yes, I mean, Wes Streeting had his reasons for resigning that were further than his own position, i.e. potentially wanting to be the leader of the party, whereas John Healey hasn't shown any desire to be running the shop, has he?
No.
So that makes it even more, perhaps, devastating.
Absolutely, and I think he's someone that people across the House of Commons respect. He's seen as being a serious individual. I mean, we've heard it from all of the opposition politicians that we've heard from today, saying that he is a good, decent man and that he's done the honourable thing.
And the military seem to respect him, as well as his colleagues, so...
Well, that makes it very, very difficult for whoever replaces him.
To replace him, yeah. Who is going to replace him?
If they go along with the details of this defence investment plan that have been revealed in his resignation letter, if they go along with the measly increases, the 0.08% increase above what was previously planned, if that is really committed to by this government, well, it will look like a dishonourable minister who takes on that plan.
And the Prime Minister is ready to publish that, potentially today. Obviously, John Healey has gone and usurped that. What happens next?
Well, you'll find out here on GB News.
Nowhere
Do
else.
send your views and post your comments. gbnews.com/your say is the way, as ever, to do so. We'll be right back with you after your latest news headlines with Sam.
Very good afternoon to you, just after 2 o'clock. Well, let's bring you a roundup then of the news emerging this afternoon that John Healey has resigned as Defence Secretary, saying the government's military funding plan falls well short of what Britain needs. In a letter to Sir Keir Starmer, he said he could not accept a settlement that leaves the armed forces without the resources they need. Mr Healey accused the Prime Minister and Treasury of failing to commit enough money at a time of rising threats, pointing to Iran, Russia and the escalation in Ukraine. He also warned the plan could reduce military readiness, increase risk to personnel on operations and make the country less safe. The resignation has exposed a major rift at the top of government today over defence spending, and Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch says John Healey was right to walk away.
Yesterday, I raised the issue of the Defence Investment Plan, and the Prime Minister exposed the fact that he was not going to put money into defence to the amount that was required. And I'm sure John Healey sat there listening to the Prime Minister tell me that he was increasing defence funding when he is not. He has done the honourable thing and resigned. I am glad that he agrees with me that we need to put more money into defence. But what is shocking is what he's written in his letter, where he says that the Prime Minister is making the country less safe and putting our troops at risk at a time of increasing threats.
Well, Kemi Badenoch isn't the only one seizing on the resignation. Political leaders across Westminster say it raises serious questions about whether Britain is spending enough to defend itself. Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey says it should be a wake-up call for Labour to properly fund the armed forces. The Green Party say the resignation shows Sir Keir Starmer has no serious plan for the threats facing the country. And Shadow Defence Secretary James Cartledge has said that John Healey showed integrity, but accused the Prime Minister of prioritising welfare over defence. In other news, Donald Trump has said the US will hit Iran very hard tonight as tensions continue to escalate across the Gulf. In a post on Truth Social, the president also vowed to take control of Iran's oil and gas markets and said America would seize Hard Island, a major oil terminal off the coast of Iran, in, he says, the not-too-distant future. It comes after Washington confirmed strikes on 2 vessels accused of transporting Iranian oil through the Gulf of Oman. And in recent days, the US has also hit military surveillance and radar sites in southern Iran. In response, Tehran has responded with overnight strikes on American military sites in the region. Well, water cannon will be on the streets of Northern Ireland again tonight as police are warning of a robust response after already 2 nights of unrest there. The Police Service of Northern Ireland says extra officers and police dogs will be deployed and those behind the violence will be brought to justice. The warning comes after 12 officers were injured and 16 people arrested during a second night of rioting, prompted by Monday's knife attack in Belfast. The victim, Stephen Ogilvie, was seriously injured and his family say they are disgusted by the recent disorder. Hadi Aladid, who was originally from Sudan, has appeared in court charged with attempted murder. It's also now emerged the 30-year-old was granted asylum under a fast-track scheme because of his Sudanese nationality. Well, our national reporter Charlie Peters has been in Belfast for us. He has the latest.
Protesters were pushed back by a water cannon after they approached police lines in riot gear, threw mortar and bricks and other objects, including bins set on fire, towards police officers. One derelict property on this road has been set on fire and gutted by flames. There's also a burned out car in the road. We're hearing this morning that 12 police officers have been injured and there have been 16 arrests after last night's disorder.
Charlie Peters there for us in Belfast. Well, those are the latest headlines. Plenty more still to come on that breaking news with John Healy, of course, here on Good Afternoon Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. 8 minutes past 2. Now, that breaking news. John Healy, the former Defence Minister, has resigned in a shocking blow to the Prime Minister's premiership. In a letter to Keir Starmer, the former Defence Secretary says Keir Starmer is unwilling to commit the resources that the nation needs for defence.
Yes, it's a move which the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, says is the right thing to do.
I am not surprised. John Healy has done the honourable thing. Yesterday, I raised the issue of the Defence Investment Plan, and the Prime Minister exposed the fact that he was not going to put money into defence to the amount that was required. And I'm sure John Healy sat there listening to the Prime Minister tell me that he was increasing defence funding when he is not. He has done the honourable thing and resigned. I am glad that he agrees with me that we need to put more money into defence. But what is shocking is what he's written in his letter, where he says that the Prime Minister is making the country less safe and putting our troops at risk at a time of increasing threats.
Well, in the last few minutes, the Minister of State for the Armed Forces, Al Carnes, has said John Healy has given this country serious service in a serious time. The threats facing this country have not paused for a change of Secretary of State. Our armed forces remain on operations around the world, standing with our allies, protecting our interests and keeping the British people safe. They deserve a Ministry of Defence that matches their seriousness with our own. That is the job. It continues today.
Well, let's cross live now to Westminster, where our chief political correspondent, Catherine Forster, is at the heart of it all in Downing Street. Catherine, what can you tell us?
Yes, well, good afternoon from Downing Street. All very quiet in the building behind me. We are still waiting to get the letter from the Prime Minister responding to John Healy's bombshell resignation. And also there was supposed to be a defence visit tomorrow. That we're waiting to hear what happens. There was originally speculation the Defence Investment Plan was going to be announced then. It sounded like it wasn't. We don't even know now when and if it will be announced, because the Defence Secretary has fundamentally gone accusing the Prime Minister and the Chancellor for failing to keep her safe. He said in that blistering resignation letter, you have been unable and the Treasury has been unwilling to commit the resources that the nation needs to defend the country at this time of rising threats. The Defence Investment Plan should have been out last autumn. We knew it was coming before the NATO summit in July. John Healy had said that it was essential that we get to spending 3% of GDP on defence by the end of this Parliament. But what is now clear from the letter he sent is that the government were only offering to get it up to 2.68%, which would just be 0.08% more than where it is going to be next year. So that clearly he feels is not going to begin to cut it, given, as he said at a summit I was at only late yesterday afternoon, that the world is more dangerous and uncertain than ever. I was with the Prime Minister in Armenia just a few weeks ago, where he was talking to me about wars on two fronts. Yes, Russia and Ukraine in Europe, but also America, Israel and Iran in the Middle East, a world ever more dangerous. And the Prime Minister's rhetoric back at the Munich Security Conference and since about going further and faster on defence spending, simply, they've kicked it into the long grass. They have promised Donald Trump, bear in mind the Prime Minister will be at the G7 in France next week. Donald Trump, we think, will also be there, has demanded, and NATO countries have agreed, to spend 5% on defence by 2035. Now, that can be made up of 3.5% directly on defence, 1.5% sort of defence adjacent. But nevertheless, huge sums of money, and the government has only committed to getting to 3% by 2034. Jonathan Reynolds, the Chief Whip, arrived a little bit earlier. Let's just have a look at that now.
Is the government failing to keep us safe, sir? Is the PM going to resign, sir? That's what the Defence Secretary said.
OK, well, Catherine, are we hearing anything from the government on this? Has the Prime Minister had anything to say about the resignation of his senior colleague?
So we have literally just received a statement from a government source, and it says this country is safer because of the decisions that Keir Starmer has made, and we will continue to act in our national interest. It is this Labour government and this Labour Prime Minister that is delivering the largest sustained boost to defence spending since the Cold War. We cut the international aid budget to make record investment in our armed forces, and now the Prime Minister is imposing cuts on other government departments to fund billions more. The Defence Investment Plan will deliver the capability our armed forces need. We will always do what is right and needed to keep the country safe. But bear in mind that what has just been revealed by John Healey, who saw the plan on Monday, was only in fact 10 billion over 4 years in cash extra for defence. Defence bosses had said there was a black hole of 28 billion, and it falls very, very far short. Everyone I've spoken to across the political spectrum has been paying tribute to John Healey, saying what a good, serious and honourable man he is, and that he has done the right thing. It's come at the worst possible time for the Prime Minister, not long after his Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, resigned ahead of a by-election. We know that he may not even be in office for much longer, but how is this going to make us look on the international stage? And the Prime Minister, as I said, will be at Evian at the G7 next Tuesday and Wednesday.
Well, that's a very good point indeed. I'm just wondering, from that government source that we just got that statement from, saying that the Prime Minister is imposing cuts on other government departments to fund billions more after cutting the international aid budget. I wonder what these cuts are. I mean, have we heard that departments are having their budgets cut? Has this happened? Have these departments been told?
Well, it hasn't happened yet, but there's lots of unhappiness in many departments, because basically the Treasury are saying to them, we're going to have to impose cuts of about 1% on capital budgets for pretty much all the departments, more for the Transport Department, more for the Net Zero Department. But all of these amounts still are not going to add up to very much, and this is because this is going to be very, very hard. I think it's worth reading out a comment that Robert Jenrick from Reform has put out, and he said that the government has got all the money in the world for Ed Miliband's mad plans for foreign aid, for benefits for foreigners, but nothing for our armed forces. Good on John Healey. Shame on them. The government, of course, as I've just read that statement, taking a very different view. But I think this is pretty catastrophic for the Prime Minister, potentially for the Chancellor too. And who would want the job of Defence Secretary now, given the Defence Secretary that has been so blistering over what he says is a plan that simply does not begin to cut it in terms of keeping us safe.
Catherine, as we've been speaking, Donald Trump has put out another message on Truth Social. It seems like he is escalating once more the war in Iran, highly relevant to this conversation, saying that he will hit Iran very hard tonight, and in the not-too-distant future, we will be taking Karg Island and other oil infrastructure points and assume total control of their oil and gas markets. Donald Trump sounds like he is preparing for significant military escalation in Iran, just at the time when we're being told we are not spending enough on our armed forces.
Well, that's very worrying indeed, if indeed that does happen. We've heard threats like this before, but that does sound exceedingly serious. And look, I was with the Prime Minister in Armenia at the European Political Community Summit. He was talking about war on two fronts. When the Strategic Defence Review was published last June, I think it was, I was up in Glasgow for that. At that point, we were looking at war in Europe. Russia was the main concern. But since then, of course, we've had this new conflict that America and Israel began with Iran. Donald Trump thought it would be over very quickly. I think several times he actually said that they'd won. But now the Strait of Hormuz is closed. It's sending our bills sky high. It sounds like America is going to escalate. So yes, the world is more dangerous, and it feels to many, certainly to John Healey, like the Treasury simply don't take that seriously and not prepared to stump up the money. And yesterday at the summit I was at yesterday with John Healey, he said the Prime Minister knows what is needed to keep this country safe. Well, he may know it, but John Healey thinks that he's not been able to get that money.
OK, Catherine Forster, thank you very much indeed, our chief political correspondent there. So we've now heard from the government. Let's speak to the Shadow Defence Minister, Mark Francois. Mark, thank you very much indeed. A government source saying that the country is safer because of the decisions Keir Starmer has made, saying that we've already cut the international aid budget to make record investment, they say, in our armed forces. They also say the Prime Minister is imposing cuts on other government departments to fund billions more, essentially saying there's not much more they could do.
Well, that's palpable nonsense. If Sir Keir Starmer is doing such a good job of defending this country, why has his Defence Secretary just quit? It was absolutely otherworldly, surreal reaction. And in fact, they're cutting the defence budget too. Your viewers may not know that in year they have an efficiency savings target, that's cuts in pub English, to save £3.5 billion of day-to-day operational spending from the budget of the Ministry of Defence. That means fewer ship days at sea, fewer flying hours for our pilots, fewer exercises on Salisbury Plain. So when they say they are increasing defence spending to the highest level since the Cold War, that's not true. It's literally untrue, because they're cutting defence spending in this financial year by £3.5 billion. And I suspect one of the reasons John Healey, who is an honourable man, has resigned was because he was no longer willing to live that life.
So hang on, Mark, if they're actually cutting £3.5 billion off capital spending, how can they say that they're then increasing the percentage of GDP?
Because they're fibbing. It's £3.5 billion of revenue spending, so it's day-to-day spending on operations. That's one of the reasons it took nearly a month to put that destroyer, HMS Dragon, to sea. Look, John Healey I've debated against many times. He is an honourable man. And what has just happened is an honourable man has just resigned from a collapsing, chaotic government. I've always believed My father was a D-Day veteran, as you know. The first duty of government, above all others, is the defence of the realm. This government is palpably failing in that duty. And Healy's letter, your correspondent quoted from one bit of it. Let me give you another sentence. This is John Healy, who's just quit, to the PM. However, your Defence Investment Plan financial settlement, which I was first given in full on Monday afternoon this week, so the Defence Secretary saw it on Monday, falls well short of what is required for defence of the country at this dangerous time. From a Defence Secretary to a Prime Minister, those are damning words. Starmer's lost his Health Secretary. He's now lost his Defence Secretary. Al Carnes, who said about an hour ago that the DIP, the Defence Investment Plan, is not fit for purpose, is now on resignation watch. Starmer's government is collapsing around him. He is not fit to lead the country.
This is the most extraordinary situation because it does seem that the Prime Minister is bound by events. I'm going to try and put a defence for the Chancellor and Prime Minister before you now, Mark, because to be fair to Rachel Reeves, it's not often I might say that, to be fair to the Chancellor, she did try to reduce welfare spending. The massive expansion of welfare spending that was coming down the track, she put on a plan to increase welfare spending by a smaller amount, saving billions of pounds for the taxpayer, billions of pounds that could have then been spent on defence. It was Labour MPs that prevented her from going down Plan A, and so she had to do Plan B, which is, again, pump up more welfare spending and raise taxes at the same time. Whoever the Prime Minister is, and this government might collapse, there might be a new Labour Prime Minister in time for the autumn. They'll still have the same Parliament. They'll still have the same MPs, putting them in the same exact bind.
Well, the job of a Prime Minister is to give leadership. It is to show a lead. Now, you're right about the Labour backbenchers. We had that revelation from the Mandelson WhatsApps from Pat McFadden, who said every time I meet Labour MPs, all they want to talk about is who else we can tax to pay more money in welfare. Yeah, that's a very good representation of the Labour backbenchers. But the job of the Prime Minister is to lead. And with all of these resignations and the fact that he and his Chancellor couldn't even get those modest cuts in welfare through, shows that basically his authority is shot. He's a Prime Minister in name only. The civil service know that, the House of Commons knows that, all the media know that. But, you know, to have this blow, to have your Defence Secretary resign on a point of honour, because the government promised to fund their strategic defence review and palpably haven't. Remember, the Defence Investment Plan is how you pay for the strategic defence review. The authors of that review, led by Lord Robertson, a Labour man to his fingertips, consistently said, when it was published, you need to spend 3% of GDP in order to fund what's in this plan. And we now know from Healy's letter that the best that was on offer was 2.68%. And that 4 years from now, where we have a war going on in Ukraine and now it looks like combat again in the Middle East. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor don't understand this. Rachel Reeves has never historically had much empathy or understanding for the armed forces. She's had very little ever to do with the armed forces. She is not the Chancellor to provide the money to keep this country safe.
Okay, Mark,
and Starmer is not the Prime Minister to do it.
We were talking to James Heapy, who was a Conservative Armed Forces Minister, and he was saying very similar conversations were taking place back then under the Conservatives, trying desperately to make the case for more defence spending, and it often fell on deaf ears even then.
Well, I don't remember a Conservative Defence Secretary resigning over something like this. I was on the Defence Select Committee for much of the previous couple of Conservative governments. There I was, day in, day out, arguing with the rest of the committee, an all-party committee, for greater defence spending. But the difference here is Labour published this much-vaunted Strategic Defence Review a year ago. It was the 2nd of June 2025. And when they were asked how how are you going to pay for it? Oh, that's coming in another thing. That will be in the defence investment plan. We were faithfully promised it would be given to us, to Parliament in the autumn. Then we were absolutely promised we'd have it by Christmas. Then we were totally assured we'd get it in the new year. And here we are in the middle of June, and still they haven't published it. And Healy, who is an honourable man I've always respected, has had enough and he's walked away. The first duty of government, above all others, is the defence of the realm, and if we have a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who can't deliver that, someone else should have a go.
OK, Mark Francois, thank you very much indeed. Shadow Defence Minister there. We've got some more reaction to the news of this resignation.
Yes, the former Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has said this. John was an excellent Defence Secretary. Every word of warning here needs to be heeded.
Short and sweet from Wes Streeting, the former Health Secretary. A Treasury source has said Rachel Reeves would always do what was right and needed to keep the country safe. Following John Healy's resignation, the source says the Chancellor will always do what is right and needed to keep this country safe. As I just said, you can see that from her actions, a record uplift in defence spending at the spending review, and then working alongside the Prime Minister to deliver billions more to fund the defence investment plan in full.
Well, the Liberal Democrat leader, Ed Davey, has said this. Healy's resignation is a wake-up call for Starmer and Burnham. Stop repeating the mistakes of the Conservatives and get serious about funding our armed forces properly. We can't afford years more political chaos while our national security is put at risk.
OK, we'll bring you more reaction as we get it. But let's speak to Mike Shearer. Hello, the former British Army spokesperson. Thank you very much indeed. How will people inside the armed forces, actually in our military, be responding to this news?
My goodness. I mean, this is just another classic example of lions being led by donkeys. I mean, we heard last month from Lord Robertson, our former UK Defence Secretary and former Secretary General of NATO, when he said, we are underprepared, underinsured, we are under attack, and we are not safe. Look, the first order of every government, as you've heard, is the defence of the realm. And in one foul sweep, we have our Prime Minister turn a strategic defence review into a strategic spending review. Look, the MOD has declared it's minus 28 billion. There's a shortfall over the next 3 or 4 years. And look, we could see this peace dividend coming way back 30 years ago when the Berlin Wall fell and the collapse of the Soviet Union. But if I just point out it, in 1960, our spend of GDP on defence was 7%. Because the people back then knew the price of their freedoms and their security. And while there is political priorities that governments need to deal with, look, the closest crocodile to the boat right now is defence. And the truth is, it's more cost effective to maintain a strong defence posture than otherwise. Look, that great strategist, that war strategist, Su Sun, he said the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. The greatest victory is that which requires no battle. Now, the simple logic in this is spend on defence now or spend much, much more later in blood and treasure. And as a soldier of the Cold War, while I was racing around my tank in the 80s along the inter-German border, I considered the greatest battle that I ever helped win was that Cold War, because the NATO show of strength was enough to protect the Western world.
It's an important point. A lot of people think that spending more must be warmongering, but in many ways spending more is actually how to avoid conflict down the line. What do you say, Mike Shearer, however, to those that profoundly disagree, who point to the arms race of the beginning of the 20th century that led indeed to the First World War? What do you say to those who say that there have been cases in history where ramping up spending, particularly when it's in an arms race with an adversary, that can actually lead us to a dangerous place?
But it never has. The stupidity and myopic view of our political masters has us right now sleepwalk into a dangerous parallel of the 1930s. the outcome of which today is still to be written. Defence spending is an investment. It's not a liability. Yet we in the UK are dragging our heels. Most military analysts, including Sakher, the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, predict that Russia will be attacking on NATO within 3 years. This is why we need to spend now and get our defences.
Mike, do you think this resignation then might perversely actually be the motivator that it should be? Will it actually change minds? Will it focus minds?
I hope it does. We need to have this conversation with the general public, who are generally unaware as to how perilous a time we're living in. Look, currently we have a miserly 2.3% spend on defence, but when you strip away the cost of MI5, MI6, GCHQ, our nuclear assets, which used to have its own budget line from central government, and MOD contribution to veterans' pensions, you're left with about 1.5% that goes on conventional assets, like the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and their associated equipments like tank ships, etc.
I think people don't understand. People don't generally understand just how much is squeezed into that overall budget. They assume this is all going to the direct line, don't they?
Yes, they do. Exactly right. Like, most people do know of Article 5, an attack on one is attack on all. Few are aware of Article 3. Article 3 directs member states of NATO to maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist an armed attack. Essentially, this directs each member state to maintain a requisite military toolbox, which is agreed by the NATO Secretary General and Sakher. This means ships, tanks, guns, aircraft, men and women to operate them. We are at the very bottom of spend in the NATO table when you strip away those intelligence services that I just mentioned.
That is an extraordinary statistic there. Well, Mike Shearer, thanks indeed for joining us and speaking through an extraordinary day, frankly, for our armed forces. Thanks indeed.
And passionately. Thank you. Well, let's have a listen to the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, who's also reacted to the news.
I am not surprised. John Healey has done the honourable thing. Yesterday, I raised the issue of the Defence Investment Plan, and the Prime Minister exposed the fact that he was not going to put money into defence to the amount that was required. And I'm sure John Healey sat there listening to the Prime Minister tell me that he was increasing defence funding when he is not. He has done the honourable thing and resigned. I am glad that he agrees with me that we need to put more money into defence. But what is shocking is what he's written in his letter, where he says that the Prime Minister is making the country less safe and putting our troops at risk at a time of increasing threats.
Well, there, Kemi Badenoch, the Leader of the Opposition, was reacting to the news of the resignation of the former Defence Secretary.
Yes, indeed. Now, stick with us, because we're going to bring you more on that breaking news. Defence Secretary John Healey has resigned from government with a very long and difficult to read for the Prime Minister, I imagine, resignation letter. So, is the Defence Investment Plan fit for purpose? He says absolutely not. We're going to put it to an ex-reserve officer.
Well, all of that and more to come. You're with GB News, Britain's #1 news channel.
Hello. Yes, it's time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Bit of a soggy one so far today. The rain will ease in some places through the afternoon, but overall staying pretty damp and staying pretty breezy. Lots of lines on the weather chart, never a good sign. A combination of weather fronts and isobars, and these weather fronts have been providing the rain. They're still largely dry across the far northeast, but even here the rain creeping in across Aberdeenshire, Caithness and Sutherland. Outbreaks of rain further south on the heavy side in places, but parts of Wales, southwest England and and Northern Ireland seeing some lengthier, drier spells this afternoon. It is quite breezy, temperature-wise around or below average for the time of year, but actually probably feeling quite humid in a few places, particularly if we do see any brighter skies. Now, the rain will continue to track its way away from the east as we go into the evening, so things turning a little bit drier, staying largely dry and fine in Shetland. Much of Scotland, though, keeping a lot of cloud with outbreaks of rain and drizzle, particularly over hills. A few showers into Northern Ireland, but also some drier interludes here. Things turning drier down the eastern side of England as we go through the evening time, as the rain slowly clears away from East Anglia and Kent, and something a bit drier too for Wales and southwest England to end the day. But staying quite breezy, staying quite blustery, and the breezes will continue to feed in more cloud and some showery rain over western hills through the night. Many central and eastern parts should become largely dry overnight with some clearer skies. Temperatures mostly holding up in the teens, so quite a warm and humid night, particularly so in the south. On to Friday, it's a messy old mix, certainly to start with, mostly cloudy, but we should see some sunny spells over northeast England, some outbreaks of rain in the west, but not as wet as today. The rain largely confined to hills and not too heavy, certainly through the afternoon. We should see brighter skies for many with some sunny spells coming through, and it will be warmer, particularly across eastern England, with temperatures getting back into the 20s.
Thank you, Britain, for the thousands of you who are becoming friends of GB News each and every week.
Good afternoon, this is the latest AI travel news from GBNews.com. The M8 westbound is restricted at Junction 7 near Eurocentral due to an incident. Delays occur on the M25 anti-clockwise between junctions 3 and 2 in Kent. On the A1 northbound near Wakefield, one lane is closed due to a load spillage, causing 40-minute delays. The M4 eastbound in South Gloucestershire has a lane blocked by a broken-down vehicle. Essex faces lane closures on the A12 northbound entry slip at junction 25 after a collision. And on the trains, Great Western Railway has no trains between West Ealing and Greenford, while South Western Railway runs replacement buses to and from Weymouth. For more travel news, go to gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 38 minutes past 2, and this is continued coverage here on GB News of the resignation of the Defence Secretary. Yes, John Healey has resigned in a shocking blow to the Prime Minister's premiership.
Yes, and he put it all in a letter to the Prime Minister, which he posted on social media. So the former Defence Secretary said the Prime Minister is unwilling to commit the resources that the nation needs for defence, a move which the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, says is the right thing to do.
I am not surprised. John Healey has done the honourable thing. Yesterday, I raised the issue of the Defence Investment Plan, and the Prime Minister exposed the fact that he was not going to put money into defence to the amount that was required. And I'm sure John Healey sat there listening to the Prime Minister tell me that he was increasing defence funding when he is not. He has done the honourable thing and resigned. I am glad that he agrees with me that we need to put more money into defence, but what is shocking is what he's written in his letter, where he says that the Prime Minister is making the country less safe and putting our troops at risk at a time of increasing threats.
OK, well, that's what Kemi Badenoch had to say. A government source has said, though, that the country is safer because of the decisions Keir Starmer has made. The source also says we cut the international aid budget to make record investment in our armed forces, and now the Prime Minister is imposing cuts on other government departments to fund billions more. It goes on to say the Defence Investment Plan, which John Healey has slated, will deliver the capability our armed forces need.
I'm sure the spokesman added, war is peace, freedom is slavery, and we have always been at war with East Asia.
No, didn't, but thank you for that. Joining us now is military historian, journalist and ex-reserve officer Dr. Peter Caddick-Adams. Drama in Downing Street, but this is very serious.
Yeah, it's hugely serious, particularly in the context of the forthcoming by-election in Makerfield, because I think one of the agendas probably of John Healey is to put defence on the national agenda so that we're all discussing it. It becomes a public issue, which it hasn't been. I haven't heard any of this sort of widely discussed before. And I think if he succeeds, and that is the major issue on the doorstep in this by-election, with all the candidates and all the public discussing this, then I think, you know, he will have achieved something that hasn't happened to date. We all need to be discussing defence
to be careful because of
crucial.
Just to be careful, just to stay a little bit away from Makerfield. But you're right that, of course, this will become a big political issue that all parties will want to get on the front foot.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we've been skirting around this issue, particularly the Labour government, almost since it came into office. And in some ways, this is an avoidable car crash. Those outside government could see something like this happening. And the Defence Secretary, John Healey's comments were very similar to those that George Robertson, former Defence Secretary, former chairman of Secretary General of NATO, who then oversaw the Strategic Defence Review that John Healey commissioned. And if you remember, Lord Robertson, only about a week ago, was saying something very, very similar. And that fell on deaf ears. So John Healey's had another go. And you know, the Prime Minister seems to be tone deaf towards this, and certainly his Chancellor, because she is just brushing this aside as a non-issue.
This is going to be such a reverberating event because, frankly, whoever now becomes the next Defence Secretary, they've got a choice. They've got a choice, which is to be seen as a patsy, seen as someone who won't stand up for the armed forces, seen as someone who accepts an inadequate deal, or they've got to find a way to find billions more for our armed forces. I mean, in some ways, it looks like a catch-22.
Well, it certainly is for the Labour Party, because I think they're all signed up to the same sort of vision. And, of course, the Prime Minister's mistake has been to gamble that if he pushes international law at the expense of defence, and you can legalise your way out of international crises and the behaviour of soldiers and people's conduct in war and the route towards war, then you can solve that problem. And, of course, that's never going to ever happen, but that's what he was gambling on, that it was lawfare rather than warfare. And, you know, that's just not working. And we have these two major conflicts in the world that completely disprove every single facet of the Prime Minister's
So Peter, you're saying there that you don't believe a word that the Prime Minister is saying that about, you know, national security, defence being the top priority, that actually ideologically he's opposed to that, are you saying?
Oh, totally. I mean, he's had the choice of where to put the country's money and how to find it. I mean, no one is discussing a tax increase, which ideologically will not go down well with any party. But I mean, that's one solution that nobody at the moment seems to be reaching for. And if we, you know, some people think that we are now in about 1938 in the run-up towards a war, when all of a sudden the taxes went through the roof and we were paying 45 or 50% tax.
Yeah, but we've already got as you will know, we've already...
Yeah, you have to look beyond the hill of what may be the future case and take some, possibly, discuss.
I mean more tax hikes. More tax hikes, surely that's not politically feasible at this point. We have the highest tax burden in God knows how long, since the Second World War,
yeah,
I think.
I'm not advocating that, but neither do I hear the debate as to whether that's possible and what that would yield. And it rather shows to me that the debate over defence hasn't been very, very fundamental or thorough. It's something that the government are running away from, and they've prioritised bandages and butter over bolstering defence. And now the chickens come home to roost. You know, that clearly isn't going to work.
Clearly, this is going to be a hugely, hugely difficult situation, not just here in this country, but there's the G7 conference coming up, there's the NATO conference coming up, all within the next month. The Prime Minister is going to face excoriating criticism on the world stage.
Yeah, and you know, this is something avoidable had he sat down and come up with some more far-reaching solutions. But you're absolutely right, and you know, we are looking at this internally in terms of a government and a Labour Party fundamental crisis. I mean, this is ideological as much as anything else. I mean, there's certainly a school of the left wing within the Labour Party that doesn't want to fund defence and will defund it by neglect because they hope that UK defence will be so weak we can't intervene anywhere else and have another Iraq or Afghanistan. So, I mean, you know, that's part of what's going on. But the bigger impact is how the rest of the world is seeing us. You're right about the G7 summit. The NATO summit, probably even more serious because it's just dealing with defence. That's on the 6th, 7th of July. We're in the run-up to that now. And for the Prime Minister to turn up, and he can't not, and just sort of say, you know, we're actually failing to agree the NATO fundamental articles, which is that we've got to spend enough to have a credible defence. And that's really where we are. You know, that will destroy his own credibility nationally and internationally. But there's a huge international aspect to this, which we're barely aware of at the moment.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Peter Caddick-Adams. Thank you for your time this afternoon.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News on another extraordinary day in British politics. Lots more coming up.
Yes, we will bring you more reaction to the breaking news that Defence Secretary John Healey has stepped down from government with a blistering letter to the Prime Minister.
But now, if you're in search of some holiday sun, not as far as Iran or Ukraine, here's the weather in closer to home in Europe.
Western.
Ready to soak up that holiday sunshine?
Won't we need some cover?
No worries. All sorted.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello there. High pressures building in for much of Europe to bring plenty of sunshine. It's especially warm through the Canary Islands through the rest of this week. Temperatures climbing towards the high 20s across Tenerife. Also quite warm in Portugal as well as Italy. Temperatures climbing to the low 30s here. There's a risk of thunderstorms across Greece, particularly in the afternoons, and that risk does continue into the weekend. But otherwise, it looks pretty warm and pretty sunny if you're heading away. Bye-bye.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
If you're working in collaboration, one with an excellent script, with an excellent director, with an excellent lighting cameraman, and hopefully an excellent actor, there is a moment when all of those energies join and a certain kind of magic is revealed. And one can see that in so many great performances that one can see on films that, of course, are not AI generated. I mean, I ask myself the question, could an AI generated film be as good as Apocalypse Now or The Godfather?
It's so funny that you mentioned that because I had a call with the producer of The Godfather just 2 days ago about how we can work together using AI. So he thinks that it's another tool in the sandbox, that you cannot replace human creativity.
The People's Channel. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Baking award-winning biscuits. Sawley Kitchen handcraft a variety of shortbreads, cookies and ginger thins. And the North Yorkshire Bakery is celebrating National Biscuit Day.
I mean, a whole day dedicated to the biscuit. Like, you have to, right? We take traditional biscuits like cookies, ginger thins, and put our own spin on it. And I'd probably say that ginger thins are the most popular. When you snap it, that noise is amazing.
Down the road from the bakery, we asked the people of Ripon for their opinion. Well, it's probably a Jaffa cake, but that might be a bit controversial, mightn't it? Because some people say it's not a biscuit, but that's my favourite. I always used to have it when I used to go and visit my nan when I was a kid.
Definitely a chocolate hobnob. It's comforting. And no, I'm not a dunker.
GB News, the People's Channel. Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
The travellers have arrived at the cricket pitch, and let's be frank, they're not very welcome. Seems to be a pattern of just taking over public land like this, and should that stop?
If you try to book onto a campsite, i.e. a regular campsite with tents and
there's shower facilities, etc., where tents, caravans go, motorhomes, your point blank will be turned down as a group. It's just impossible to get onto a campsite. I can appreciate it's a cricket field, but that's what they're doing. They're camping because they've got nowhere else to go.
OK, well, let's get the former Labour Party MP and Graham Jones on now. Graham Jones, it's not cricket, is it?
Volunteers spend hours cleaning these places up. They spend hours investing in them, and then to have them just turned into a rubbish dump or not be able to use. And in this case and in other cases, the abuse that you receive is just incredible. I mean, it's just not acceptable.
The People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just gone 10 to 3. And of course, we're continuing our coverage of the extraordinary resignation of the Defence Secretary, John Healey.
Yes, how much impact will this have on Keir Starmer and his government? Well, joining us now is retired British Army officer Major General Tim Cross. Tim, huge news. John Healey, well respected, it seems, by military chiefs and his colleagues alike in politics. Is this a great loss?
Yeah, I think it is. I'm not... If I'm honest, I'm not too surprised. There have been various rumours around for a while, actually, that John's been getting very irritated, to put it politely. He is, I think, a very honourable man. I think he's done a great job as Defence Secretary. He's well respected in the MOD, and everybody I speak to about it is of the same view. He's very, he's not a guy to speak out like so many other politicians, to make all sorts of statements and so on and so forth. He just quietly gets on with his job. He's been very loyal to the Prime Minister. He's been in defence, obviously, for quite a long time. And he's been a minister, a Secretary of State, I think, in most Labour governments for a long, long time. So, it's a great loss, really. And nonetheless, I mean, I think he's right to go, is the bottom line. I mean, the government have prevaricated. The Prime Minister has been, walking around the world telling everybody to spend more on defence. And the rhetoric has not been matched by the reality of what he's prepared to do here. So I'm sorry to see him go. But if I'm honest, I'm pleased he went. I think it sends a very important message.
Now, can whoever his successor is get things back on track?
Well, it's going to be tough, isn't it? I mean, in the middle of the rest of the political chaos and the uncertainty over the future leadership and so on, anybody who's prepared to step into these shoes, could be out of a job in not too long, because if the by-election goes the way that everybody thinks it will, and the leadership context, etc. So, who could step into this? Well, there are ministers within the MOD who probably could. Al Cairns is a well-respected, because of his military background.
And he's a name we've heard a couple of times so far today. Tim Cross, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks indeed for joining us. This is the end of Good Afternoon Britain, but continued coverage comes with Martin Daubney after this.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Box Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Good afternoon. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Overall tomorrow, a lot drier and a bit warmer than today. It may start fairly dull, but it should get a bit brighter, and it won't be completely dry. Still a few showers around, but not the persistent rain that many of us had through this morning from the set of weather fronts, all trying to move out into the North Sea, but leaving behind a lot of cloud, rain and drizzle, particularly over the hills and around the coasts in the west. Some of that rain just pushing its way up towards Orkney, but most of it clearing from eastern parts of England and Scotland. So becoming much drier here through the night with some clearer skies. It will be quite a warm night, particularly in the south. Temperatures holding up in the mid-teens and still quite breezy here as well. On to Friday, bit of a mishmash, certainly to start with. A lot of clouds, still some rain and drizzle across Wales, northwest England, Northern Ireland. It's probably a largely dry but fairly drab start across southern counties. Still quite breezy here. Northeast England into eastern Scotland. I think the favoured spots for starting off, at least with some sunshine. A few showers continuing to come into northwestern parts of Scotland. As we go through the day, we should see skies brightening in many locations. Quite a wet morning for northwest England, perhaps, and there will still be rain and drizzle over the hills of Wales, certainly through the morning. Showers will keep going into western Scotland, blown along by a fairly brisk wind. But elsewhere, generally any rain petering out, the skies brightening, the cloud breaking up, and we'll see some decent spells of sunshine, I suspect, by the afternoon, which will lift the temperatures. A warmer day tomorrow, certainly over eastern England, with some sunshine down, temperatures likely to climb back into the 20s. More heavy showers to come through Friday evening across the northwest, but otherwise pretty pleasant Friday evening for many. Still a bit breezy for sure. The weekend starts fine, probably quite cloudy, but some sunshine developing, and it is going to get a bit warmer through the weekend too.